Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yao Ming of Revolution. No surrender, no retreat. Iranian brave warriors refuse to back down as Trump sends more of our warships, more of our tax money down the drain. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Where revolution is a way of life and revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some late breaking news the revolutionaries can use. Trump bought, paid for, that's nothing new, but the Iranians vowed to put an end to the empire. Let's get into the content. Salute. He sends more warships.
The U.S. Central Command has released new footage of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, likely sailing in the Arabian Sea, seen south of Oman, and approaching the country's west coast, during crucial Iran-U.S. talks in Muscat on Friday. The footage, released on February 5, 2026, includes aircraft taking off into the sky and returning to the Navy carrier's flight deck. On the carrier's flight deck, what appears to be a flurry of jets and random people is actually a routine affair, with sailors aboard the carrier trained to work as a team, to launch and land aircraft safely and on time, every time. It appears the warship is attempting to intimidate Iran, as U.S. officials have stated that the Abraham Lincoln, anchored in the Arabian Sea, is approaching the Iranian coast with the intention of striking Iran. However, it is worth noting that Iranian advanced missiles are not for collection, as IRGC has made it clear from the outset that Iranian weapons are ready to destroy the U.S. war machine at the slightest mistake. The U.S. fleet's conspicuous movements amidst tensions in the region are interpreted as an attempt to sabotage negotiations between Tehran and Washington, that begging for a deal on Iranian nuclear program. So far, negotiations which include the exchange of nuclear documents and the Red Line, in Oman, have been completed today. The termination or suspension of Iran-U.S. talks has not been essentially lifted, and communication and exchanges continue unabated, IRNA reported. Oman is once again hosting Iran-U.S. talks, a diplomacy-like journalism, and Iran has a long memory of having been attacked by the U.S. during ongoing dialogue. And the U.S. fleet movement is seen as a key element of military prestige and a demonstration of U.S. power, possibly in preparation for a military scenario. However, first, they must leave the Red Sea, having been hammered by Sana'a forces, or later, they will sink in the Arabian Sea if confronts Iran.
Confirmed that Mi-28 attack helicopters are now in service in Iran. They've got Russian Spartak MRAPs in Iran and Mi-28 helicopters. Will the next delivery be Russian Su-35s? Now, if you're wondering what good Mi-28 attack helicopters do, it allows for better night operations for the Iranians, anti-armor and ground attack operations, kitted with 30mm autocannons, up to 16 guided anti-tank missiles, unguided rockets, and air-to-ground bombs, allowing Iran to target armored vehicles, tanks, fortified positions, and even drones. The Secretary of Iran's Supreme Political Council, Ali Larijani. He was in Moscow this week, and he, of course, did meet Putin when he was in Moscow. I think this is an old photo, but it was confirmed by Russian Iranian media that they did meet. But, what was so interesting about this was in the Iranian press before Larijani went to Russia, it was described not as what it's usually described as, going to meet Putin. Larijani goes to meet Putin. It was described as going to meet with Russian officials, going on a Russian, bilateral, whatever. It's like, to me, that immediately indicated that this is not just about words being exchanged between Putin and Larijani, or a message being sent from Pezeshkian or the Ayatollah to President Putin. That was just my initial takeaway. And I was like, maybe I'm being schizo. Maybe, this is just me thinking something that's not actually happening. But it appears as though maybe I was correct, because the Iranians said that in the meetings that took place in Moscow, political, security, and military spheres were all addressed. Okay. Then Larijani comes back to Iran. And what happens not too long after? We see last night, we see 4 Russian military jets come tumbling into Iran. Okay. So what does that tell us? Well, I don't know what it tells us. It tells us that there are a lot of possibilities that the Israelis and U.S. troops in the region should obviously be worried about right now, because the Russians have sent a great deal of Iranian cargo jets toward Iran over the past weeks and months. We know also Belarus, Lukashenko, he has sent several of these cargo jets with Belarusian goods on them. Belarusian anti-missile defense systems, air defense systems we have seen in Iran now, okay? But there's something that the Iranians have been waiting for, and we've touched on this a little bit over the past few months. We've seen the buildup of very special sorts of hardened hangars being deployed in Iran, at air bases in Iran. We've seen from satellite images of hardened shelters being constructed at these Iranian air bases. Okay. What is that indicative of? It is indicative of the fact that Iran is preparing for Russian fighter jets to arrive at some point in the near future. We know that they are coming. We have seen the leaked purchase order that Iran made for these Russian fighter jets, Su-35s. We know for a fact that this is all real, because part of that purchase order from 2023, deliveries expected in 2026, were Mi-28 attack helicopters. Mi-28 attack helicopters. Now, we've seen no proof that the Russian fighter jets have arrived in Iran. We have seen proof that Iranian fighter pilots are training in Russia on these fighter jets. But what we just got over the past 24 hours shows us that movement is beginning to happen. What is this, you wonder? This short snippet? It has been confirmed that Mi-28 attack helicopters are now in service in Iran. So far, they've got Russian Spartak MRAPs in Iran and Mi-28 helicopters. Will the next delivery be Russian Su-35s? Good question. Now, if you're wondering what good Mi-28 attack helicopters do, first of all, it allows for better night operations for the Iranians, anti-armor and ground attack operations. These Mi-28 attack helicopters are kitted with 30 millimeter autocannons, up to 16 guided anti-tank missiles, unguided rockets, and air-to-ground bombs, allowing Iran to target armored vehicles, obviously unarmored vehicles as well, tanks, fortified positions, and even drones. Okay. So When would these be useful? Well, these would be useful in a lot of potential scenarios for the Iranians. Of course, if they get invaded, I mean that's a non-brainer, a no-brainer. I don't think it's at all possible that they're going to get invaded. But what could happen is you could have the activation of some of these Mossad-linked groups, some of these U.S.-backed groups that covertly operate within Iran, like MEK, for example. They do have the capacity to engage in conflict, albeit limited, but these Mi-28 attack helicopters would be very useful in neutralizing threats from within. Okay, so you have this now. You have a lot of Russian military cargo jets which are headed there, and you also have Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, which has come out and given his final thoughts on the matter before, in all likelihood, we do witness the beginning of a conflict. Iran escalation could blow up the entire Middle East. This is Russia's foreign minister. The Middle East is like a minefield waiting for a chain reaction, and an escalation between the U.S. and Iran could trigger it. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has warned. Iran is our close partner and neighbor. We care about how the situation develops, more so because it is explosive not only for Iran itself, but also the entire Middle East and Central East. Too many mines are buried there, waiting to be set off by a clumsy foot. The Iranians, the Israelis, the Americans know we are prepared to offer our services that could contribute to implementation of agreements hopefully when, or if they are reached. So why does Russia care so much about this? Well, again, many reasons why Russia cares about Iran. They are obviously a strategic partner from the security aspect of Russia. They do a lot of trade, a lot of business. The Iranians, I think one of the biggest reasons, well, also Russia is leading up the nuclear program in Iran at Bushehr nuclear facility. Rosatom is there. Rosatom has Russian nuclear scientists and engineers there, okay, protected by a few lone S-400 systems. But the reason why Russia views Iran with such great importance, I think one of the big reasons is because if you look at the map, Iran is pretty damn close to Russia. And there are a lot of, if Iran were to fall, first of all, you'd have U.S. missiles there pointing at Russia from the south. That is strategic encirclement of Russia, right? That doesn't help China. That doesn't help Russia. That is very bad. Now, another big issue is if chaos were to erupt, if Iran were to become Syrianized, where you have all of these extremist jihadists running through Iran and it's total mayhem and chaos, that could very easily trickle on up to Russia. And that is a major security issue for the Russians. So there are many factors at play here as to why the Russians care so deeply about this safeguarding of Iran. And clearly, we're beginning to witness a real return on the investment that the Iranians put forward. At the very least, we have MRAPs, we have Mi-28 attack helicopters. Who knows what else is en route or in storage in Iran right now from Russia. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being banned
has rolled out its fastest long-range missile yet. The Khorramshahr 4, Mark 16 2,000 kilometers, heavy warhead, now sits inside an IRGC missile city. Israel warns defenses could be overwhelmed. So is this deterrence or the opening move in a new missile arms race? Iran has deployed what state media describes as its most advanced long-range ballistic missile inside an underground Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps missile city. In a report published Thursday, Press TV announced the deployment of the Khorramshahr 4, calling it
Iran's most advanced long-range ballistic missile.
Press TV said the move reflects a doctrinal shift by the IRGC, adding that
the pivot carries a clear message to regional and extra-regional adversaries.
According to Press TV, the Khorramshahr 4 has a range of 2,000 kilometers and can carry a 1,500 kilogram warhead. According to IRGC-aligned Fars news agency, the Khorramshahr 4 has an accuracy of around 30 meters and is
one of the main pillars of Iran's active deterrence.
Fars additionally claimed that the speed, which ranges from Mach 16 when outside of Earth's atmosphere to Mach 8 inside the atmosphere, is intended to minimize the reaction time of enemy defense systems.
The Khorramshahr 4 is also equipped with intermediate guidance, reduced radar cross-section, and high resistance to electronic warfare in order to significantly increase its penetration ability.
The deployment comes amid renewed debate over Iran's conventional missile arsenal. In an analysis published by the Jerusalem Post, the outlet argued that while Iran's nuclear program remains constrained after the June 2025 conflict, the more urgent threat lies elsewhere. The Post explained that the main issue is conventional ballistic missiles. Currently, the one immediate potential existential threat is Iran's approximately 2,000 ballistic missiles, which could still increase to an amount that would shatter Israel's air defense shield. According to the report, Israeli officials warn Iran could scale production significantly in coming years, potentially overwhelming layered missile defenses if numbers surge into the thousands. The analysis noted that during the June 2025 conflict, 36 missiles penetrated Israel's defense systems, resulting in casualties and extensive damage, raising concerns over what larger salvos might achieve. Israeli Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Al-Zamir has reportedly raised the ballistic missile issue directly with senior US officials, pressing Washington not to sideline it in broader negotiations. With help from China and other countries, the IDF Chief of Staff has warned that Iran could increase its ballistic missile production to 300 per month, and within a few years dwarf its prior ballistic missile totals. At 6,000, 8,000, or even 10,000 missiles in 2027-2028, analysts worry that even Israel's awesome multi-layered defense shield would find it hard to keep up. For Tehran, the Khorramshahr 4 signals deterrence. For its adversaries, it sharpens an already volatile strategic equation. As negotiations unfold, Iran's expanding missile capabilities remain central to regional deterrence calculations and escalating security tensions.
Hey guys, imagine stepping into Iran's deepest, darkest underground tunnels, a place where the new generation of missile monsters, Khorramshahr 4, waits. Rumors say mass production is done and they are ready to launch. Smash that like button right now and stay tuned for breaking news. Look, friends, today's story is about a massive game changer in the region. We are talking about a missile named Khaybar, or simply Khorramshahr 4. Many thought it was just a blueprint, but the news says otherwise. Let's see why this missile has taken sleep away from many worldwide. Reports suggest Iran plans to unveil brand new secret missile cities soon. No one has seen inside these tunnels yet, but the reveal is imminent. Imagine hundreds of ballistic missiles lined up deep, 500 meters down. This represents a deterrent power that literally no one can ignore today. We're all waiting for the moment they release the tunnel footage. Rumors say we will see long rows of these missiles very soon. This will prove Iran has passed the design and testing phases completely. It means they entered mass production and widespread delivery to the forces. Now let's get into the technical specs that will blow your mind. This missile has a range of 2,000 kilometers, striking deep into enemy lines. But range isn't the only thing. It's what it carries that matters. Khorramshahr 4 can transport a massive 1,500 kilogram warhead all the way to target. Guys, pay attention. 1,500 kilograms of explosives is absolutely no joke at all. It counts as the heaviest warhead among all current Iranian ballistic missiles. If this missile hits anywhere, practically nothing will remain of that target. This high destructive power turns Khorramshahr 4 into a genuine nightmare for enemies. The more interesting part is the fuel used in this advanced rocket. The engine uses hypergolic liquid fuel, which has a very special feature. Unlike older missiles, this fuel can sit in the tank for years. You don't need to spend hours on dangerous fueling before the launch. This feature ensures that Khorramshahr 4 stands ready like a soldier on guard. You can keep the missile in the silo ready to fire instantly. Preparation time for launch has dropped to less than 15 minutes now. In modern warfare today, this speed means the difference between winning and losing. Now let's talk about the brain of this missile. It is fascinating. The guidance system operates in 3 separate stages to bring error to 0. The first phase is like all missiles. The first stage engine works, but the real magic happens in the middle phase outside Earth's atmosphere. In the middle phase, the warhead corrects its path using small engines. This means the missile knows exactly where it goes before entering atmosphere. This system removes the need for any external GPS signals for guidance, so electronic warfare and jamming will have practically no effect on it. This independence from ground control is a huge advantage in real combat. Most missiles need constant data, but this one thinks for itself mid-flight. It locks onto the trajectory and corrects errors without any outside help. This makes it a fire-and-forget weapon in the truest sense. When guidance finishes, the warhead dives toward Earth with terrifying high speed. Here, no guidance system is on. The missile falls like a stone. This feature prevents enemy defenses from diverting it using electronic jamming attacks. A 4-meter object coming at light speed, impossible to stop by any means. The impact speed of this missile is reported to be around Mach 8. That is 8 times the speed of sound, leaving no reaction time. Imagine a 1,500-kilo meteor hitting the ground at this insane velocity. The destructive power is so high, it doesn't need to hit dead center. This doesn't mean the missile isn't accurate. Actually, it is super precise. New technology brings the pinpoint accuracy of this missile to a few meters. For a rocket with a 2,000-kilometer range, this is hitting the bullseye. Achieving this accuracy without external fins is a true engineering masterpiece. Another key feature of Khorramshahr 4 is its incredibly low radar cross-section. The body designed deflects radar waves so it remains unseen by sensors. This means the missile won't be detected until the very last moments. When it is finally spotted, it is too late to do anything. Let's flash back to June 2023 when this missile was officially unveiled. Back then, we all saw how successful and clean the launch test was. But now, in 2020, we are discussing a fully operational missile city, a place where hundreds of these missiles are deployed for active duty. Another technical point you must know is the maneuverable warhead it carries. This warhead can change its path in the middle phase, confusing radars. This ability prevents anti-missile systems from predicting the final trajectory of impact. Combining high speed and maneuverability guarantees bypassing almost any defensive shield. The important point is that all these technologies are native to Iran. The Arvand engine installed on this missile is one of the most advanced. This shows sanctions could not stop the progress of the missile industry. Instead, it forced Iranian engineers to find creative ways for better designs. Iran's strategy with this missile is striking vital and strategic enemy targets. Military bases, airports, and enemy command centers are all within easy reach. With a 2,000-kilometer range, Khorramshahr 4 can cover the entire region effectively. This means no safe spot exists for the enemy within this radius. The underground tunnels keeping these missiles have a story of their own. These cities are built deep inside mountains, resistant to heavy bombardment. Missiles are mounted on mobile launchers ready for immediate firing at command. This mix of stealth and firepower forms Iran's core defensive doctrine. Many military experts worldwide consider Khorramshahr 4 a masterpiece of efficiency and cost. It delivers terrifying performance at a lower cost compared to foreign samples. Removing fins makes the missile lighter and takes less space in silos. This allows storing more missiles in every tunnel, ready for action. Finally, I must say the unveiling of this missile city sends a message. Iran wants to show it has no hesitation in defending its borders. These missiles are security guarantors and tools to prevent any foreign aggression, a power that makes the enemy think 1,000 times before acting. How much do you think this missile changes military equations in the region? Can hypergolic tech and high accuracy defeat modern air defense systems today? I personally think Khorramshahr 4 has opened a new chapter in missile power. Write your opinions for me. I am eager to know your views. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed this technical and exciting review today.
Please hit that like. No, you can't. We're not going to talk about missiles. We're not going to talk about our support for the groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. And then, like, I forget, done with Danny Davis and get ready to start another interview. And, the talks are back on. Was that being widely reported in Iran yesterday, or was that something just for the us outsiders? Let's start with Nima. What were you seeing or hearing?
Yeah, it was actually whenever something comes out, everybody would know what is happening, and they were saying that. So what's going on? The United States has decided, because they were the basic points, in my opinion, that it was that the United States wanted to negotiate in Turkey, in Istanbul,
right?
And first of all, and Iran didn't want to, go there, and Iran had their option on the table. They were talking about Oman and Muscat being part of, the main, because you remember the last time they were negotiating before the war breaking out between the two parties, they were negotiating in Oman. That's why Iran sees that as a viable choice right now to go in that direction. So then they talk about, the ballistic missiles. The United States wants to put some limits on the ballistic missile program, which is, everybody knows that that's a red line for anybody. I would say that even for the supreme leader of Iran, that's a red line for him. He never talks about, it's a basic, to survive in this wild, planet we're living in. And then they said that Iran would not support the, Houthis. They're talking about Ansarullah and Hezbollah.
Right.
And we see finally everything breaking down, and then let's talk in Oman, and all those options are off the table. It's a propaganda machine, Larry. Even before coming to this live, they were talking about, the Al Jazeera coming with new narrative. They have somehow leaked out the agenda of negotiations. They said that Egypt, together with Turkey and Qatar, they leaked this information, and it's unbelievable. And I think it's part of the propaganda. They trying to do everything because they have this weapon in their hand. They have all these weapons in their hand. They want to, somehow, attack and, make some sort of bubble for the Iranian people. But after all, you see that everybody's sitting in their home. They say, that's a propaganda. They're trying to manipulate the situation.
Yeah.
It is the whole game, in my opinion.
No, Professor, I think, Morandi, I may be responsible for the Shahed 149 drone that was shot down, and let me explain why. Sunday is on January 30th, as I understand it. The video footage from the Shahed was broadcast on Press TV, showing the aircraft carrier and such. And so I wrote about that, and I said, the drone was able to overfly the aircraft carrier, no reaction. Either they didn't detect it or they just thought it wasn't important. And I'm beginning to think, and so I wrote that up, and I think somebody at the Pentagon read it and go, damn it, we're going to shoot that down. It's not going to do that again. What's your take?
Well, one thing that I think is important for your viewers to know, to know is that Iranians are probably the most well-informed people about anything that's said about their country that's negative. Because there is a huge Persian language media apparatus funded by Western governments in the West, based in the West, television channels in the hundreds, and websites, cyber armies. So even during those days when we didn't have internet, or when the internet was just Iranian and local, satellite TV was full of anti-Iranian propaganda. So people always knew what the Americans were saying about Iran. People always know what the British, the French, the Germans, what the Israeli regime and others are saying about Iran. They know. We hear more from them than we hear from Iran in general. That's a general fact. You have like a news channel in Iran, then like the 3-4 main channels, they have an evening news and a nighttime news, and that's it basically. But you have like all sorts of anti-Iranian news channels from abroad that 24 hours a day are producing misinformation, disinformation, they're spinning the news and so on. So Iranians always hear the news. Like what was happening yesterday, you could get the different interpretations of it from a host of different sources. In general, though, as Nima pointed out, some things are clear to Iranians that no one is going to negotiate, for example, the Iran's missile capabilities or its regional alliances. And so as soon as Al Jazeera starts saying that, they know that this is propaganda. Either Al Jazeera is producing propaganda, because at the end of the day, Al Jazeera is in the American camp. It may say positive things about Palestine, but ultimately it's in the American camp. Either Al Jazeera is making this up, or the Turks and the Egyptians and the Qataris produce some ridiculous document in order to please Trump. But it's not something that Iranians would even take note of. I think the most...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're saying.
No, I was looking for, there was a news report earlier saying that Egypt, Qatar, and I forget the other country,
Turkey.
were offering to mediate the talks, but they were insisting that one of the things that they were supposedly pushing is that Iran wouldn't be able to use ballistic missiles for 3 years. And I'm thinking, if I was Iran, I'd tell them, hey, shut up. We're not interested in what you think.
All right, folks, hold on just a second. We've got something important to share with you. First off, a big thank you for all your incredible support. Our team's been putting in the hours, really working hard to bring you insightful guests, new and improved formats, solid, high-quality analysis every week. Our next goal, hitting that 100,000 subscriber mark and getting that silver button? Let's make it happen together. Every like, comment, share, and subscription truly helps us grow and keep improving. All right then, let's get back to the video.
Well, I think probably one reason why Iran has chosen Oman is that Oman has over the years been careful not to behave in such a manner. Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, these governments have always played into the American hand. That we saw, for example, when Trump went to Egypt, they all participated and they all tried to whitewash Trump's role in the genocide in Gaza. So I think probably Oman. I hear that if Iran's second choice after Oman was Baghdad, but in any case, the talks will be held in Oman. I'm pretty sure that they will take place, but it's unclear what will happen because Iranians are not going to give up enrichment.
Right.
They're not going to give up their nuclear program. They will be able to, if the Americans are reasonable, to do a deal not like the JCPOA, because the Iranians don't like the JCPOA. It was deeply flawed, but a better deal, which reflects Iran's technological advances. But I don't think that Trump has that capability. I think actually Trump is being pushed even by his antagonists in Washington towards conflict. So, for example, I think the role played by the New York Times and other media outlets is intentionally to push the United to prevent any sort of incentive in the White House for a deal. I think in general, the political establishment, and which is of course Zionist dominated, doesn't matter if they're Democratic or Republican. So I'm pessimistic about a deal, but it's not impossible. But there's no doubt that Iran will not accept zeroing enrichment or limiting its missile and drone capabilities or retreating from its alliances and that sort of thing. It's just not going to happen.
Do either of you think that is there a compromise? But I have given my opinion that thinking that one thing Iran might be willing to discuss. Okay, we'll limit what enrichment we do, but then I also heard a statement yesterday that previously Iran was willing to move some of its enriched uranium off to, say, Russia, but now they've said no, we're not even doing that now. It's gonna stay here in Iran. Nima?
I think as far as I know about that case is that this particular moment that we are in right now, Iran has no reason to move anything to outside of Iran into the enriched uranium. They're not talking about it nowhere in the media, in the domestic media. They're not talking about it. The main issue with the nuclear program right now and what they have on the table, what they're willing to talk about is the enrichment and the future of nuclear program of Iran. Iran is prepared to produce each and every document to assure the Trump administration or the United States that Iran is not pursuing nuclear bombs, not pursuing nuclear weapons. That's the whole reason that Iran is willing to do the negotiations, because the policy, the strategy on the part of the Iranian government, it's been, in my opinion, hasn't changed, and that's why they're willing to talk with the United States. And that's all I can say. I cannot say that they can go 1 inch forward, in sending any sort of, enriched uranium to Russia or any other country, any third country. And the whole thing is to de-escalate with the United States and ensure that Iran is not willing to produce nuclear weapons. That's all, in my opinion.
I'm looking at this. We've been getting bombarded with reports that the attack's imminent. I keep hearing from it's going to be in the next 2 or 3 days. I do think if an attack is going to happen, it's going to happen within the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at max, because Iran, Russia, and China are going to conduct their annual naval military exercise. I've heard it everywhere from the middle of February to the end of February. Normally it was like in the first week of March. And I think if that the United States is not going to attack Iran if Iran's sailing around with Chinese and Russian warships. What's your take on it, Professor Morandi?
I think that the Iranians at least feel that they are in a very strong, excuse me. I've had this cough for many weeks and I don't know why it's not going away, but
I understand. I got dripping sinuses. That's blowing my nose here.
So I think that the Iranians feel that they're in a commanding position. First of all, they're confident about their military, and the Iranians have a long-range missile capability that we've seen used against the Israeli regime, and which has been strengthened and developed further since the war. But most of Iran's missile capabilities are not even directed towards the Israeli regime. They are anti-ship missiles. There are medium-range missiles directed towards the Persian Gulf. There are short-range missiles, drones, and also, of course, the Navy and small submarines, mini submarines, speedboats. All of these are directed towards the United States, not towards Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that the United States has been threatening to attack Iran for over 2.5 decades.
Yeah, well, 46 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But after invading Iraq and Afghanistan, it rose to a different level of importance in Tehran. So they began developing all these underground cities for missiles and drones and other capabilities, which are directed towards the Persian Gulf. And of course, in addition to that, they have the long-range missiles that can be used from deep inside Iran. So one reason why the U.S. aircraft carrier has gone so far away from the Iranian coast is because it's fearful of Iran's missile capabilities. And one thing that I have heard from a very credible source is that the Iranians have also stationed anti-ship missile systems alongside the coast of the Persian Gulf, where there are no American ships. And that sends a signal to countries in the Persian Gulf that host US bases. And I think that basically means that if there's war, those tankers are no longer going to be able to take oil or gas or anything else to or from the Persian Gulf region. There will be the end of trade in the Persian Gulf. So you have this enormous capability directed towards the United States, towards its bases, but you also have this immense firepower that's directed to the other side and the Persian Gulf itself, and the other side of the Persian Gulf not being very far away.
Yeah.
So it's not like Israel. It's very close. If anyone looks at the map, you don't need long-range missiles to destroy these key facilities, which are not all that many alongside the other side of the coast, on the other side of the coast of the Persian Gulf. And of course, Iran would have the legitimate right to do so because all of these tiny regimes have US bases. And as we speak, those bases are being used against Iran, even now. So if it was under normal circumstances, I would say that the chances for a US strike on Iran are zero or virtually zero. But since you have the immense power of the Zionist lobby and Israeli firsters in the White House, in the Senate, in the House, and of the nature of Trump and his personality and his past, I can't bet on. I wouldn't bet on anything if I was a betting man, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that if there is war, the United States would lose. So on the whole, I think that taking everything into account, I would imagine that the Iranians feel that the chances for war are not very high right now, but that they're only preparing themselves for war. And as we speak, they're preparing. In other words, every day they are developing their defensive and offensive capabilities. And the head of the Iranian armed forces, or I'm not sure who said this, but senior figures in the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guards have said that Iran's military doctrine has shifted from defensive to offensive.
Mm-hmm.
So for now on, Iran is going to be more focused on heavy strikes, on swiftly destroying the enemy. That will be the priority rather than defending itself against enemy attacks. So I think probably if there's war, Iran will they've already said, as we all know, that even a small attack by the United States will be considered to be a war, and Iran will retaliate with everything it has. And so I think that if there's a U.S. attack, the oil and gas markets immediately will go through the roof.
Yeah.
Larry, just to mention, since Dr. Morandi forgot his name, it was the chief of staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, Major General Abdulrahim Mousavi. He said after the 12-day war, Iran's military doctrine has shifted from defensive to offensive with a focus on asymmetric warfare. This is what we've heard here in Iran.
Well, I know that Doug McGregor and Colonel Danny Davis and myself, the three of us are in agreement that, because we've heard through various contacts we have within the Pentagon and the U.S. Air Force military, the general view within the U.S. military is that they can easily defend against Iranian missiles, and that Iran, they really believe that, and they believe that Iranian air defense is so weak that we can go in and bomb it well. And that's what the three of us find so frightening, because I think we all, the three of us agree that Iran actually is, those are false assumptions, that Iran actually has a very robust air defense and is in a position to easily penetrate the air defenses that the U.S. has deployed throughout the Persian Gulf at its various bases.
Yeah, Larry, of course. Let me say something. When it comes, I usually talk with Andrei Martyanov. Andrei Martyanov is a friend of us. And he, one of the main points he brings up every time we talk, that this offensive, systems are much more advanced or much more capable of the, comparing to the defensive systems. When you attack, you're mostly successful in the way that you're attacking instead of defending yourself against those attacks. That's why I think the main power on the part of the Iranian army would be the offensive capability on the part of Iranians. How they're capable of using, long range, middle range, and short range missiles against the enemy. You can see in the Persian Gulf going to Israel and beyond Israel. This is the main goal, that's why he's talking about the doctrine has changed from defensive to offensive. The main defense, the best defense would be an offensive that is capable to dismantle the capabilities of the enemy to attack you. This is what's going on, as far as I know, in the mind of the Iranian generals.
Professor Morandi, back in October of 2024. That was the first time where that Iran did what I called a demonstration for Israel. They launched missiles that was in retaliation for Israeli attacks, but it was intended to demonstrate, to try to show Israel what Iran was capable of. And I still remember watching the video of that one hypersonic missile as it came down. It came down and it deviated, and then it was being maneuvered, which is remarkable technology. And I think Iran was trying to say, hey, look at what we can do. And yet the West completely dismissed it. And then we get into the 12-day war last June. And again, there is the way the message was presented has been presented to the American people. And it's told in Israel that Iran was ineffective. It's a lie, but that's how they're being propagandized to believe that Iran has a very limited missile capability. And so that's why, as I'm looking at it now, I think, and the question goes back to, this general saying we're going to go on the offensive. Does that mean you think that if war breaks out, which I pray to God it doesn't, but if it does, Iran's not going to take its foot off the accelerator this time as it has in the past?
Yes, I agree. Of course, I don't know anyone in Iran who wants war, and war will be devastating for the world.
Yes.
But the fact is that I don't know about Iran's defense capabilities. They've been working on it since the war, but I'm sure that Iran's offensive capabilities are much better than the defensive capabilities, because we've already seen during the 12-day war how the two sides, or the three sides, Americans being with Israelis, how they battled each other. Although it's possible that Iran has received new technology or new systems from friendly countries, the Chinese, the Russians. But the point is that Iran's offensive capabilities are much more developed. And we know that from the likes of Steve Bannon, who said after the end of the 12-day war that the real story here is that the Israelis were in trouble and that Netanyahu needed a ceasefire. And during the last days of the war, the Iranians were hitting Israel very hard. So even if they're propagandized, ultimately at the end of the day, when the missiles start coming in and there's no oil and no gas, that propaganda will melt away. And this will be a war for Iran's survival. This is not a war where, like in the case of Israel, where the Iranians were firing back missiles to force the Israeli regime to accept a ceasefire. Here, it would be something quite different. And U.S. missile defenses are very limited, and the targets in the Persian Gulf are quite diverse. It's not just U.S. bases. They will be oil installations. They will be tankers. How are THAAD missiles going to stop drones from destroying tankers? How are they going to stop drones from destroying other ships or oil installations? When sorry again. When you're flying into Qatar, you see all these gas installations in the water. Who's going to protect those? Or if they block the Strait of Hormuz, who is going to get through? If they sink a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, what is going to get through? So this is fantasy. But let us assume that they believe what they believe, and the war starts, and then the Iranians start hitting these installations, and they will start hitting the American ships. I mean, if the Americans could not defeat Yemen after 7 weeks, then how are they going to defeat the Iranians, who have a much larger, maybe incomparably larger drone and missile system? But one other thing that the U.S. government has to take into account is that if there is war, the Yemen that they lost to after 7 weeks will be a part of the war. And the Iraqi resistance will be a part of the war. And the Iraqi resistance would be new to the equation.
Right.
And they have underground missile cities. They can take US bases in Iraq and especially in northern Iraq. They can go into Kuwait. This would be, Ayatollah Khamenei said this would be a regional war. If it's a regional war, then I don't think there's a chance in the world that the United States could block Iran. Iraq itself is a country of 45 to, 50, 45, 48, 49 million people. Yemen, too.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
But say that last part again. You froze up there for a minute.
Yeah, from Yemen too. You have to repeat, Professor Man.
Or is it?
It seems that we have some sort of issue with Professor Man's connection.
Yeah, you're freezing up there.
Yeah, Professor Man, just a little bit.
Country is together have a population of
you're freezing up. Let me stop you there for a second to get you.
He's out. He's going to be back in a minute.
Okay, so I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit just for people watching and listening. How has Iran changed since you were last there? Because you grew, you were a baby and an infant during the war, 1980s. So when the war ended, you were like 9 years old, 10 years old. So you didn't know what was going on, but you left Iran 12 years ago. So how has it changed?
Larry, the Iran that I have known before, it was, we had you.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Yeah, Professor Miranda is here.
Yeah, I'm getting. I've asked Nima to. We'll come back to what you were talking about, but I wanted to get from Nima what he's seen the difference in Iran, or has he seen any difference? Because he left 12 years ago. Now he's back.
Larry, the experience Iranian had during the war between Iran and Iraq was somehow disappeared in the mind of those new generations. They had no idea what has happened in those days. And Professor Miranda was part of that war. He was participating in defending the country in those days. But for my generation and the younger generation, they had no idea of a war and how can it influence in the Iranian society, the Iranian economy, the Iran as a country, as a sovereign country. I think that was changed during the first attack, during the Israeli attack on Iran. And somehow showed how the people would react in the case of a war against Iran. And today, when you look at the mainstream media and the way they're talking about that, so let's fight Iran, let's attack Iran, that would bring the government down. Yeah. I think that's not going to happen, Larry. That's going to change drastically everything, because the people, the moment they see that the Israeli or American attack is destroying everything, the infrastructure is attacking and killing civilians, everybody would understand that this is not about, negotiation. This is not about any sort of, deal. It's about killing Iran as a country.
Yeah.
That's the change for my generation, for the new generations in Iran, because they understand that is not going to bring anything good to the future of this country, for the future of new generations. They don't want to sacrifice everything, because we know the devastation. Because right now, I'm getting back to what has happened to Iran during the war between Iran and Iraq. And we see how the population was suffering in those days. And in the aftermath, basically in the aftermath of the 8 years of war, the imposed war on Iran. Nobody wants that here in Iran. Nobody's, even willing to see those days coming back to Iran and to the future of Iran. And these sort of realities are not reflected. Nobody's talking about these realities here in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
All you hear in the mainstream media, even those people who are trying to be in the middle, somehow talking, to the both sides, they don't have a clear picture of the Iranian society. They don't know, they don't understand the Iranian society. The only issue, Larry, there are people out there talking about women, love, freedom, all of these, nonsense. That doesn't make sense anymore here in Iran. That doesn't resonate with the people here in Iran. The issue that the people are facing right now here in Iran is mostly, the pressure, the economic pressure on the part of the United States, and the way that they're trying to, collapse the Iranian currency.
Yeah.
This is the issue right now with the Iranian people, nothing else. This is, in my opinion, if someone in the West wants to understand the Iranian society they want and what the Iranian people want, this is the whole issue. And the government is not going to stay the same, because the world has changed. The world is changing today, Larry. I would say the war in Ukraine has changed everything. Everything. And we cannot get back.
How so? How has it changed?
That's changed because after the war in Ukraine, Larry, I was talking with Ray McGowan. He said nobody would have believed in the United States that Russia and China would get that close.
Yeah.
The same is happening here in Iran. Iran is getting closer and closer to Russia and China. I haven't seen this before. I haven't even imagined that this would happen. But it's happening in terms of the economy, in terms of the security, the military. Iran is getting closer because Iran doesn't see a viable choice in the West. They don't see anybody capable of negotiating to understand the situation, the Iranian position. This is the whole point, in my opinion.
Professor Morandi, well, first let me acknowledge you are a war veteran. You were wounded at least twice, and you've also suffered the effects of getting gassed. The mustard gas that the United States helped provide Iraq. So you're not one of these armchair warriors. You've been in the fight, even though you are what I call a kind, gentle soul. There's some iron under that under that facade, but. Looking at the cooperation with Russia and China, when I started, really looking into this, I was surprised to learn that Russia and China started these joint military naval exercises with Iran back in 2019. And having scripted military exercises before, I know that doesn't start just a week or two before the event. It usually starts a year to 18 months in advance. What sparked that decision to develop that kind of cooperation? Did they just wake up one morning and say, hey, we need to do this, and why?
I think this was a gradual process. And for the Iranians, I think there were divisions that needed to be overcome with regards to how the Iranians will deal with the West and how they'll deal with the global majority. So, for example, I think the Rouhani administration, to a degree, sacrificed Iran's relationship with China and with Russia in order to get a nuclear deal. And the nuclear deal didn't work out. neither under Obama nor under Trump. And we were unable to benefit from good relations with non-Western countries as much as we should have because of those policies. Even though the leaders' policies were different from the administration's policy at that time. Then when President Raisi came, he was much more in line with the leader's position. And it was during his presidency that Iran joined BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. After his demise, President Pezeshkian, I think contrary to the expectations or the predictions of some of these analysts in the West, he actually moved in the same direction as President Raisi. And the 12-Day War actually created a national consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So after the 12-Day War, I think Iranian society, and I think this sort of goes back to what Nima was saying a few moments ago. After the 12-Day War, there was a shift in Iranian society. And those liberals and among others who were concerned about Iran's growing relationship with Russia and China, those voices diminished substantially. In fact, Larry, one thing that I can say about Iranian society, and that is according to polls that are regularly carried out by different institutions here in Iran, is that now, or at least the last poll that I saw, which was not a very long time ago, now most Iranians want a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
And the leader is in the minority. He is among the minority. So the 12-Day War had that sort of change or created that sort of change in perception. But in the West, they don't see this because the media, it's basically repeating the same talking points. And it doesn't matter if it's the New York Times or if it's Fox News, if it's CNN or the BBC or Sky News or whatever, or The Guardian. When it comes to Iran, they're all more or less the same. And that is, Iran is completely evil. The so-called regime is deeply unpopular. Everyone hates it. It's about to fall. I mean, even I saw something from Trita Parsi today, which I found very strange. And he was claiming that in Iran, there are calls for military intervention. I don't know who these people speak with, but they, I think, live in this echo chamber. And they speak to like-minded people.
Let me interrupt. When you say military intervention, you mean that the military should intervene in the government?
No, like the West the United States should attack Iran and overthrow the government. It's ridiculous. And anyone who lives in Iran would know that that's not at all the mood in Iran. And maybe there are some insane people or some horribly biased people or some people who are fanatically supportive of the West, but that's just that perspective is so obscure and way out there that it's for me, it's strange that anyone could even believe such a thing. But ultimately the point that I'm making is that in Iran, perceptions about the world have changed, and now tilting to the global majority, moving towards BRICS, moving towards the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, enhancing military cooperation with the Chinese and the Russians makes lots of sense to ordinary people. People like me were pushing for this a long time ago, but there was a lot of resistance to it, and a lot of resistance to what I was saying in meetings and in gatherings. But now you don't see that anymore.
Yeah,
because people are beginning. First of all, they see that a lot of the things that are said about Russia and China are not accurate. What the Western, because the Persian media that's in the West that's anti-Iran is also very anti-Russian and very anti-Chinese. So people are always getting this very large dose of anti-Russian and anti-Chinese propaganda as well. That's a part of this. So all the West is not just paying to for the media to attack the Iranian government. They attack BRICS. BRICS is worthless. It's useless. It's not going to get anywhere. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is just a club where they sit together and nothing gets done. That's the sort of narrative that's constantly repeated. But people are seeing that a strong relationship with China has meaning. China is purchasing our oil. And our economy continues to grow despite all the antagonism of the United States. Nima's been to Tehran for a few days. I don't know if he used the metro, but if you go to the metro in Iran is much better than the metro in London, or the metro infinitely better than New York.
Yeah, New York City did a horror show there.
Yeah, and it's rapidly growing. They're building new lines. It's not as if the Iranian economy is stagnant. So when the Chinese are purchasing Iranian oil, despite U.S. threats and U.S. sanctions, when the Russians are cooperating with Iran, despite U.S. antagonism, well, gradually, even those liberals in Iran, even those who were traditionally pro-Western, when they see Israel bombing the country and bombing civilian targets and the U.S. supporting it and the Europeans supporting it, and they see that it's the Russians and the Chinese that are behaving reasonably and defending Iran at the UN Security Council, then the mood changes.
Yeah.
So this was a gradual process. I can't put my finger on a particular date or event, but it was a gradual process. But I think that the 12-day war, although it comes way after the beginnings of the maneuvers between Iran, Russia, and China, but I think the 12-day war in general was an important turning point in Iranian perceptions about the world.
Well, actually, let me see. I think there are two events, and I'd like the reaction of both of you to this. The first event was when Donald Trump walked away from JCPOA, because up to that point, Russia and China had basically signed on with Europe and the United States to impose sanctions on Iran. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Trump walks away from trashes it. And a year later, Iran, China, and Russia are starting to conduct naval military exercises. I think that was the first event where Russia and China went, okay, but we've got to have a different relationship with Iran. But then in the post 12-day war, it then kicked into another level of what I'd say an increased level of economic cooperation that didn't exist 3 years ago. And as a result of that, Iran now, the way I look at it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Iran now has options by virtue both of being a member of BRICS and then the declaration by Russia and China on the snapback sanctions telling Europe, no, we're not going to support that. Forget about it. And so I would say that Iran now actually has a brighter future economically ahead of it than was the case, a year or two ago. What do you think, Nima?
Yeah, Larry, let me bring something about JCPOA and how the situation right now is different from what it was during those days. That is the European role in the whole situation. In those days, the people in the administration, in the Rouhani administration, they thought that Europe can be a positive force in the whole negotiation and the system and the agreement between the United States and Iran. Europe has proven, as time went by, that they have nothing to offer to Iran. They did nothing. They did nothing when Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. And of course, the 12-day war has shown how Europe is seeing Iran. They're literally seeing Iran as their enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, it doesn't make sense to me. Somehow, it didn't make sense to me, but I totally understand it. I think the British government and the German government, they're no player. They are losing their importance in the mind of those decision makers here in Iran. If, let's assume, the new thoughts shaping and negotiations happening between Iran and the United States, I would assure you that Europe is not going to be in the same position anymore. And nobody would care about Europe that much that they cared before, because they have nothing to offer, Larry. They did nothing. Of course, they're mostly, influenced by Netanyahu and his administration. They're prepared, as Macron said that. He said, we are all in to attack Iran.
Yeah.
These are messages for those people who somehow were optimistic about the role of Europe. That doesn't exist anymore. I think the situation, when you compare right now to what it was before, is the reality of JCPOA as an agreement, and how things have changed in terms of development here in Iran, how the nuclear program has changed drastically. And the other point, which is related to the negotiators or guarantors of the agreement, is that Europe is not in that place. I would say Russia and China are much more relevant players for Iran right now than Europe.
Professor Morandi, what do you think?
I agree. But what I would add is that during the nuclear talks in 2015, there was a lot of optimism, as I think we all know, that a nuclear deal will lead to better relations with the West. Now, there were those who were skeptical. I was one of them. I think that's pretty well known. Even though I was with the nuclear delegation, I did go there at the request of Dr. Zarif. I stayed in Vienna with him during the whole 3 weeks of negotiations, and I was sort of like a media advisor. He wanted me to play a bigger role, but I didn't want to be a part of government, as is the case today. So I was skeptical, but most people were optimistic. But then when Obama began violating the deal, whereas the Iranians were abiding by it, the bitterness began to grow, or the how should I put it? Skepticism began to grow. It still wasn't the majority, but it was growing. And then when Trump came, as you rightly alluded to, he tore up the deal.
Yeah.
And that wasn't supposed to happen, because the Iranian government said that he can't do it. The president, Rouhani, said he can't do anything about it, Trump. And the negotiator, and Dr. Zarif too, did not believe that this could happen, that it was possible, but it happened, and there were no consequences for the United States. And that, I think, led a lot of people to begin to rethink and think and conclude that the path taken by President Rouhani really wasn't it wasn't a smart move to put so many eggs in the Western basket. And he, as I said earlier, he sacrificed Iran's relationship with China and Russia, mostly China actually, in order to get this deal done. And it took President Raisi.
I was just going to say, explain that part about the relationship with China. What do you mean by that? How did signing on to the JCPOA affect Iran's relationship with China?
Well, Iran began to, under President Rouhani, they began to make things more difficult for Chinese companies in Iran. Iranian oil.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now. You were getting like to the most important part, and then your froze are going, oh no.
Okay, well, the Chinese, they were, first of all, President Xi, when he came to Iran, the Chinese president, his negotiations with President Rouhani and his trip weren't that great. And President Rouhani, as I said, was looking to the West at that time. And China were not that welcome, because they were hoping that Western companies, especially oil companies and gas companies like Total, would come in and invest. And I don't like saying this, but I in my opinion, I wasn't in government, but I was always saying that Total will never invest in Iran. And ultimately they didn't. They came to Iran, they took a building, rented a building, stayed a few years and left. That's all they did. And I thought I was, not just me, others too, but I didn't think that the West would ever invest, because I thought that the problems that we had with the United States and Europeans went far deeper than the nuclear issue, and that it was linked to the Israeli regime. It was linked to Zionism, that the Israeli regime would never allow the United States and the Europeans to have a decent relationship with Iran. It's just not doable. But in any case, after the United States left the deal and tore up the deal, the Europeans did nothing, and that alludes to what Nima was saying. Europe became increasingly irrelevant to Iran. And now the German chancellor said a few nasty things about Iran over the past few months, and especially the last couple of weeks. And today we saw the Iranian foreign minister tweet against him. His tweet went had far more likes and retweets than the German chancellor's. And I think if anyone looks at the Iranian foreign minister's tweet, it is pretty harsh towards the German government. It is very harsh, actually. I don't recall ever seeing a tweet so harsh by an Iranian foreign minister. When I think he did the right thing, because of the insults that the German government had, the many insults that we received from them, the Iranians received from them. But the point is that, as Nima was saying, Europe has become irrelevant. The United States is unwilling and incapable of doing business with Iran. And there's another thing. J.D. Vance said a few hours ago that Iran is strange in that the Iranian leader, he's unwilling to speak to Trump. But I think J.D. Vance, in this, the arrogance of power makes him fail to recognize and understand that Trump killed so many Iranians in the war,
right,
by colluding with the Israeli regime. Forget the armed insurrection, but the war. And then during his first term, he tried to strangle the Iranian economy as much as possible, killing ordinary people. And he also killed General Soleimani and his companions. So why would Ayatollah Khamenei ever speak to, if he did speak to Trump, I think many people would be shocked. I cannot envisage him ever doing that. But Trump is so deeply despised in Iran and seen as someone who kills, someone who lies, someone who cannot be trusted, someone who will change his position from day to day. There's no reason for him to speak with him. And I think that either J.D. Vance is very ignorant about Iran, or the arrogance of power doesn't allow him to think rationally, or that this is just a part of the anti-Iranian propaganda. But what I think has happened is that Iran has decidedly shifted away from the West. And some people think, I as an English speaker, as someone who was born in the United States, I have no animosity personally towards the United States as a country.
Right.
But the second language in Iran at school is English. And many of our textbooks are in English, and if they're in Persian, many of them are translations of English textbooks. Not always. there are lots of other Iranian books as well, but our higher education is deeply influenced. And then you have the culture, cultural history, the relationship, Hollywood, music, all sorts of things coming from the West for many, many decades. It's not as if like there's this hostility towards the American people. I think maybe we've discussed this when we were together in Moscow, that when Iranians chant death to America in their rallies, it doesn't have anything to do with the United States as a people. It is an anti-imperialist chant, just like when in Latin America they'd say "Yankee go home." They don't mean the American guy who's walking down the street and shopping somewhere in Bolivia, or it means the U.S. government and U.S. imperialism. It has nothing to do with individuals. So the anger and hostility that's directed towards the U.S. government is something that's very widespread. If you look at polls in Iran, Trump is very unpopular. The U.S. government is very unpopular, and that serves to create a greater incentive for better relations with China and Russia, especially at a time when the Russians, like ourselves, are sanctioned. So there's nothing to impede the relationship because no one is afraid of being sanctioned by the West. We're both sanctioned. And in the case of China, which is advancing so rapidly technologically, I mean, when you travel to China and go to different cities, they're decades ahead of everyone else. There's no doubt about it. And so when the doors to to the United States, Europe, as Nima said, is becoming increasingly irrelevant. But when the door is closed to the United States and they're open to Russia and to China, after a debate that lasted for years, for a few years, people are saying, let's go, let's use these doors. And then once these doors have been opened, Larry, that changes the whole dynamics. When I went to China for the first time, I remember going to Beijing, and I was told that there are like a handful of Iranian students in Beijing. A while back, I went to a smaller city in China, and for a CGTN program, and in Tianjin, and they brought a number of international students to participate, and there were just in that small crowd, there are 3 Iranian students in that, from that city. The number of Iranian students studying in China today, or in Russia today, or in other countries that are non-Western today are much greater than before. So imagine 10, 15 years from now, when these people have graduated and the next generation has graduated. When I was young, when I was just an academic, almost everyone went to the West to study. Now people are spread out across the world. And so that is going to influence the way in which these people, who they marry, who they do business with, who they communicate with, who they want to cooperate with. It's not going to be like before. So once when you keep pushing the people away from yourself, like the United States has done for decades, then these people are going to look for new opportunities. And once they find those opportunities, they're not going to go back.
Yeah. In fact, I saw there's a channel on YouTube called Inside China Business by an American named Kevin Wamsley, who's actually from Sarasota, Bradenton area. And he put up a video the other day noting that the top engineering schools in the world right now are all in China. They're not the MIT, which was the number 1 ranked school in the United States, is number 13 on that list. So, Nima, you did your engineering because you're an engineer, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh boy, I hate smart people.
They're changing.
But you went to school in Germany, correct?
Yeah, I went to Germany. I was there for 5 months. Then I received, the scholarship from other countries. Then I decided to go to Brazil. Everybody, I remember, Larry, in those days, everybody said, no, don't go to Brazil. My supervisor in Germany said, don't go to Brazil. That's going to be, different. I am so happy today that I have chosen Brazil.
Yeah.
Because Brazil is amazing, in my opinion, and has a bright future, bright future in one of the most important countries in the southern part of the, American continent.
Well, let me ask you.
Let me say something else in that direction that you've mentioned. Just 2 years ago, people in Iran, I received emails from different people who want to get scholarship from outside from other countries. They want to know how is Brazil, how is the United States. They want my experience. Then he told me, one of these people who contacted me, and it was more than, but one of them that I remember vividly right now is that he asked me that he's receiving this amount of scholarship from Chinese government and this from the United States, and the value was not even comparable.
Yeah. Well, actually, the cost.
I told him, sir, there is no comparison. Go to China.
Yeah, the cost. The Walmsley talked about that as well. The cost of going to like MIT is $68,000 a year, and in China it's $4,000. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be an economics major to figure out where the better deal is. But all right, guys, listen, I've kept you more than an hour. I am so appreciative of your time, but I think it's important to get, for people to hear Nima and Mohammed, that they find out, geez, these are very smart Iranians. These are very cultured Iranians. These are very humane Iranians. You're not these wild-eyed terrorists blowing up the world. That's a lie that the United States keeps perpetuating. So you're doing your part for public diplomacy. I want you both to stay safe.
Thank you, Larry.
All right, and
thank you, Larry. It's always a pleasure being on your show, and I hope we see better days soon.
Yeah, and I hope to be with you at some point soon. And one of these days, maybe I'll get down to go to Brazil and see Nima in his new natural habitat.
Sure.
Me too.
All right, my friend.
An honor about both of you.
Well, I pray for peace, and I want you all to be safe. Yeah, God bless.
Thank you. For now, I have to fix this chair. It's terrible. It's it's very uncomfortable. But for now we have to pray for the best. And I know they're tough. These are tough times, and for people across the world, really. But
yeah,
I'm an optimistic person by nature.
Okay, those are like I could call them almost my adopted sons. Nima is the age of my son. Professor Morandi's a little bit older, but they're both great men, great human beings. And I hope you got some insights into the situation in Iran right now. I do pray for peace. I appreciate you taking this time to watch. Hopefully you found it worth your while. Hit that like and subscribe.
China has just cut Israel off from getting any more money, and it didn't even bother telling anyone first. Chinese fund has gone into an Israeli court and said their deal with the blue and white state is dead because Beijing now treats Israel as too dangerous to invest in. Not controversial, not debated, just blocked entirely. And that quietly blows a hole in the one thing Israel's always depended on, which is the idea that it can keep fighting and the economy will just keep ticking along like nothing's changed. But that only works if investors believe the war ends soon, at some point, if ever. China doesn't. And so the money no longer moves from China to Israel. And here's the part people still haven't clocked yet. That when capital stops believing the violence is temporary, it doesn't come back with reassurance. It just disappears without any drama at all. Deals simply don't finish. Projects never get off the ground. Losses don't show up as crashes. They simply show up as absences. That's what's started happening here now. And once that machine switches off, it doesn't switch back on just because people shout about it very loudly. And Israel very much is. Right, so China's done something very specific, and it's already entered Israel's legal system, much to their despair. A Chinese investment fund called Ballet Vision has told the Tel Aviv District Court that it cannot proceed with new investment in Israel because the Chinese government has classified Israel as a high-risk zone and prohibited new Chinese investment. That statement is a constraint placed on the record in a live lawsuit now, and it immediately stops money that was expected to move from moving at all. Ballet Vision controls 80% of an Israeli company called Hanita Lenses, which is an intraocular lens manufacturer based at Kibbutz Hanita in northern Israel. The kibbutz sold most of the company to the fund in 2021 for $35 million, with $25 million paid directly to members of the settlement and the rest invested into the business. The deal included an option for Ballet Vision to purchase the remaining shares later. That option is now being contested in court because the Chinese fund has said it cannot exercise it while the Chinese government ban remains in force, which removes the legal ability to send new capital into Israel. Now, Kibbutz Hanita has responded by suing the fund for roughly $11 million, accusing it of refusing to complete the agreed purchase. And that lawsuit exists because the money is no longer allowed to move. It is a blocked transaction, a frozen option, a court being asked to decide what happens when one side says the state behind it has pulled the plug. And that's a condition that now sits inside Israel's own legal process. Liu Yuzhao, a director of Ballet Vision and the chief executive of Hanita Lenses, has stated that the company has lost around $15 million over 3 years and accumulated roughly $4 million in debt. He took over as chief executive to prevent collapse and has said the company might break even in 2026. Those numbers fix the condition that this is happening in a business that cannot absorb a long pause in funding without consequence. So the Chinese fund's response to the lawsuit states that since the outbreak of the genocide in Gaza in October of 2023, Israel has been classified by Beijing as a red category high-risk area, right off the bat. So under that classification, all new Chinese investment is prohibited. And the fund says that as long as the restriction remains in place, there's no practical operational ability to exercise the option to buy the remaining shares. And that removes discretion and removes the idea that this is a choice by a nervous investor rather than a rule imposed from above. Restriction is not framed as a sanction or a political gesture here. It's simply being framed as a risk classification. Risk classifications are designed to last until conditions materially change. Once an area is placed in a red category, institutions are expected to behave as if the danger is structural and not temporary. That classification binds all future decisions, therefore. This is China doing what China does. They've not held a press conference to announce this. It's simply allowed its own policy to surface through a commercial dispute, a blocked purchase, a court filing that says money is not allowed to move. And that method shows how this pressure operates without spectacle, without escalation, without negotiation. And Israel's reaction has been typically Israeli. It has been immediate and it has been very, very noisy. Israeli media have covered the lawsuit as shock. Commentators have treated the fund's statement as a hostile act. Officials have complained the decision is deeply unfair. It's politically motivated. They just don't like us. But that reaction functions as evidence of surprise because this is not how Israel expects major economic partners to behave during war. The expectation has always been that conflict is temporary, therefore risk is manageable, and capital will always return. But that expectation now no longer operates. Capital does not classify an area as high risk if it expects a short disruption. Capital does not prohibit all new investment if it believes conditions are going to go back to normal at some point soon. It withdraws when it believes the conditions have become persistent and they're not likely to end soon. And that's a distinction that fixes a constraint that Israel simply cannot talk or beg or plead or complain its way out of. And it's not the first time Israel has been criticized for this sort of military action and the consequences it has on the economy. What's different is that this decision is not about approval or disapproval. It's simply about exposure. A red category classification says that violence is not a spike, but an ongoing feature, and that the cost of being wrong about that assessment is too high to justify by sending more money. China's role matters because of how it behaves as an investor, which is ultimately all this boils down to. Chinese state-aligned capital doesn't move impulsively. It plans for decades and prices risk on the assumption that it will not be able to exit quickly if conditions deteriorate. When that kind of capital stops moving, it's because it no longer believes the environment is going to reset on a timeline that makes continued exposure rational. So the lawsuit at Kibbutz Hanita might be small in global terms, but it exposes something a heck of a lot bigger. A system that assumed wars could be fought without altering economic normality has collided with a decision that treats the war as open-ended. And once that assumption is removed, every plan built on it becomes unstable. And that condition now sits in Israeli courts, in its companies, and its investment outlook. Israel spent decades operating on a specific economic assumption, and that assumption has been withdrawn by a major external actor. The assumption is that war is episodic, it's containable, it's priced at temporary risk. That assumption underpins how Israel borrows, how it markets itself to investors, how it insists that nothing fundamental ever changes. China's classification removes that assumption without asking permission. Chinese capital treated Israel as investable because it believed disruption would pass and normality would return. That belief allowed factories to be built, stakes to be taken, and options to be written. A red category classification says the opposite. It says the violence is not an interruption, but a condition. And the way this has surfaced strips away all the diplomatic theatrics. A fund has told a court that it cannot send the money. That's how structural pressure works when it is designed to persist rather than shock. The process closes doors quietly and leaves them closed. Israeli officials have tried to frame this as misunderstanding or overreaction, but the classification does not depend on persuasion. Risk categories bind behavior across institutions and banks and funds and compliance departments. Those actors do not reverse course because someone is unhappy about things on television. Anita Lenses is not a strategic weapons manufacturer, it makes lenses. But the fact this kind of business is caught by the restriction shows the breadth of the classification. This is not targeted pressure aimed at a single sector. It affects any new flow of capital. Liu Yuzhao has said that the company may break even in 2026, but that timeline assumes stability and continued access to capital too. The Chinese ban removes one of those pillars. So a company already carrying losses now operates under a rule that prevents its majority owner from consolidating ownership or injecting fresh funds into it. Israel's economy is littered with examples like this. It's heavily dependent on foreign investment, particularly in technology, manufacturing, and advanced industries. Those sectors rely on the assumption that capital can enter, exit, and scale. But when a major investor class decides new money cannot enter at all, that assumption stops working in practice. And other nations, other economies, other investors will look at this and perhaps think again too. The reaction from Israeli commentators has focused on outrage and disbelief. Israel's used to criticism, doesn't like it, and we know how it always responds to it. But it's not used to a major economic partner just quietly reclassifying it as simply too risky for new investment. Surprise is visible because this cuts across the narrative and Israel remains economically insulated. China's decision also carries weight because of how other actors will read it. Investment decisions, they don't get taken in isolation. Other funds, as I just said, will watch each other. Banks will watch them. When a long horizon investor moves first, it sets a reference point that others must now explain to their shareholders, perhaps, why they are ignoring it still. Israel can continue to trade, receive diplomatic support, and fight. What's constrained is planning. Long-term projects depend on predictable capital flows. A red category classification injects uncertainty into forward-looking calculations because it's got no clear end date. And that's why the distinction between sanctions and risk classification matters. And it's stark. Sanctions are political tools that can be lifted with political decisions, being done on a whim. But risk classifications persist until conditions functionally change on the ground in a way that satisfies the compliance frameworks. And that removes leverage from diplomatic protest. Israeli officials have complained that China might be acting unfairly and that this might be political. But fairness doesn't come into it. It's not part of the mechanism. This is just purely business. The mechanism asks whether the environment is stable enough to justify investment and exposure. And the answer being given by Beijing is no. And that binds Chinese capital. Full stop. End of story. It's the lawsuit over this at Kibbutz Anita. Sure, it's going to proceed through the courts. But the court cannot compel a foreign government to lift one of its own classifications. It can only decide how losses are distributed between private parties when the money physically cannot move. So that leaves Israel's legal system managing the fallout of a decision that's being made elsewhere, and they can't do jack about it. This is how economic pressure changes the texture of a conflict without announcing itself as a pressure. The war doesn't need to be lost for its cost to escalate. It only needs to last long enough for capital to stop believing it's going to end anytime soon. China has not said how long the classification is going to last. I doubt they actually can, given that we don't know how long the situation in Israel is going to last. Risk categories don't come with countdown clocks, unfortunately, for Israel. They remain until evidence on the ground justifies a change. And that evidence has to be measured in behavior and duration, and Israel cannot schedule its way out of the mess it's made for itself. This is why the reaction from Israeli political figures has been so agitated. They are used to managing pressure through reassurance and alignment with allies. A risk classification does not respond to reassurance. It responds to patterns of behavior and conduct and what the situation is on the ground. Stability. The Chinese fund's letter to the court is careful, it's procedural. You wouldn't expect anything other than that from China. It doesn't accuse Israel of wrongdoing, it simply states a classification that's being put into place, a prohibition that comes with that, and explains that these remove the ability to complete a transaction. And that dryness simply leaves no room for any more argument. Israeli media coverage has tried to frame the situation as hostile intent, but intent is irrelevant to compliance. Chinese investment rules are enforced by bureaucracies that penalize deviation. A fund that ignores a red category classification risks sanctions at home. So this exposes another assumption that's underpinned Israel's economic confidence, even though quite where that comes from, I've no idea, given how badly their economy is on the ropes and has been for some time now. Because Israel assumed that even when relationships get strained, capital will always find a way through because returns justify the risk. A prohibition just simply removes that choice entirely. And Hanita Lenses now operates under that ceiling. Its majority owner cannot complete the purchase option. Its recovery plan depends on stability that can't be assumed. Its legal dispute exists because the system that allowed the deal to be written has changed from underneath it. And that's simply how economic consequences of war or genocide accumulate without the headlines. A blocked deal here, a delayed project there, a compliance review that ends up saying no. Altogether, they just simply narrow options and slow movement. Israel's economy is being built around speed and adaptability and confidence. Those qualities depend on frictionless access to capital and the belief that disruptions are temporary. And of course, they've always believed that because Israel have always been treated as exceptional. But when that belief is withdrawn by a major investor, speed slows and confidence has to be asserted. The Chinese classification does not distinguish between public and private risk. It treats the entire environment as hazardous. Private companies bear the cost of state decisions without direct recourse. The lawsuit at Kibbutz Hanita is an example of that transfer. And this dynamic shifts how responsibility gets experienced. Israeli businesses that assumed the state would shield them now find themselves exposed to decisions made by other states' risk managers. And that exposure operates automatically as well. So China's move has also removed a fallback argument that Israel has relied on for years, which is that criticism does not translate into a cost. A prohibition on new investment translates immediately into frozen money, though. There's a temptation to treat this as an isolated case, I suppose. We are talking about one company, Hanita Lenses. Risk classifications, however, get shared. They get referenced. They get monitored across financial systems. Once applied once, they become part of the background data other actors consult. Israel remains capable of fighting and governing and trading, but what's changed is the pricing of the continuation. Because when a war or genocide is priced as temporary, the cost can be deferred. But when it's priced in as ongoing with no end in sight, the costs just keep accumulating. The Chinese government has not threatened Israel. It's acted as if the war will not end soon enough to justify new exposure. That assumption now sits inside Israel's economic environment and constrains future decisions. Israel can protest this decision, but protest doesn't move money for them. And the classification simply just sits inside compliance systems and transactions just get blocked by default. Sanctions get announced and negotiated. Risk classifications are assessments. Once made, they persist until the underlying conditions change. No one suggested that revision is imminent. The Chinese government has not offered a timeline. Silence in this context binds planning because planning requires dates. Israel's economic model relied on the assumption that wars end before investors lose patience. That assumption has been invalidated by a risk bureaucracy deciding that patience is no longer justified. Israeli companies seeking expansion capital must now explain why they are safe in an environment officially classified as unsafe by a major economic power. That explanation must overcome a documented prohibition. The reaction inside Israel has been to treat this as unfair or biased, but risk systems don't care about that. They don't give a stuff about fairness. They just care about exposure. And this is why the lawsuit at Kibbutz Hanita matters beyond its immediate stakes. It's a point where an external decision enters domestic life and can't be waved away. The court can allocate blame, but it can't reopen the tap and let the money flow. Israel's leadership can insist that nothing fundamental has changed, but that's wrong. That insistence doesn't alter the fact that a major source of long-term capital has simply stopped behaving as if this genocide is temporary. And the most important part of this is not how much money has already been lost, but how future money will end up being treated. Capital that never arrives shapes outcomes all the same. China's acted on the assumption that this conflict is not nearing resolution. That assumption operates through enforcement inside China's own systems, as is their right to do. Israel is not facing economic collapse quite yet over this, but it is facing the removal of a buffer it relied on for decades, the belief that war can be fought indefinitely without altering economic normality. When capital stops believing The genocide will end soon. The warfare will end soon. All your options narrow. Your timelines end up stretching, and confidence has to be asserted even harder. It's not anything that can be fixed very quickly. China's behaved as if this condition has now become permanent and acted as a result of that. That behavior now sits inside Israel's economy too, and its courts, and its planning for into the future. Wars don't need to be lost to become unaffordable. They only need to last long enough for capital to stop pretending they're temporary. But it's not just in Israel that China's rocking the Middle Eastern boat, of course, as Donald Trump's attempt to use tariffs to coerce states to stop trading with Iran failed miserably thanks to China as well. So get all the details of that story right here. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out.
Chosen people. And, you know, Zionism is really about racializing Judaism. So, yeah, I mean, that is a particularly malignant strain of what we're talking about. But no, it's absolutely an arrogant religion.
We have special guests with us. Keaton Weiss from the Due Dissonance is here. You know him, you love him. He's our favorite guest host. Hi, Keaton, how are you?
Good. How are you guys doing? Good to see you.
Keaton, hello.
Hello.
So I wanted to bring on a Jew,
yes,
because of what I found we all found in the Epstein file.
The Jew? You wanted to bring in the Jew?
I wanted to bring in
Yes, you need the right Jew for this. I am the Jesse Lee Peterson of Jews.
Can you tell me what is a woman? All right, here we go.
So you love God?
Do you love God?
Do you love God?
Do you love him? Do you love God? I love how he just keeps asking the same question over and over.
Yeah, he's great. He's the best.
He's kind of Scientology's you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from Jeffrey Epstein to a guy named Roger Schenck. And he says, Jeffrey Epstein says this is the way the Jew make money, and made a fortune in the past 10 years selling short the shipping futures. Let the Goyim deal in the real world. From shipping news, the most dramatic growth has been in shipping futures, which allows shipping companies to lay off risks. The most popular futures are forward freight agreements to deliver goods, in particular the route, some of the blah, blah, blah. They have grown in the past year to roughly the size of a physical market, according to Bill Lyons of the Baltic Exchange and Shipping in London. Many of the industry have been suspicious of such futures because they've been averse to hedging their bets. Risk-taking is, after all, part of the game, and averse to complicated financial instruments that they do not really understand. So then Goyim were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel.
Who wrote that? Ted Cruz?
That's that is Sephardic leader Rabbi Ovdia Yosef, spiritual leader of the Shah's party, said that in 2010. So here's a little bit. I mean, it's nice to have a purpose in life, but, you know, and me being Goyim, my purpose in life is to do all the hard work while another group reaps all the benefits. Isn't that something? So here,
talking about in the bedroom with my Jewish ex, where I did all the work like a goy.
Like a goy.
So this is from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, established in 19. Sephardic leader Yosef, non-Jews exist to serve Jews. So there it is. Goyim were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel, he said during a public discussion of what kind of work non-Jews are allowed to perform on Shabbat. Why are Gentiles needed? They will work, they will plow, they will reap. We will sit like an effendi and eat, he said to some laughter. Yosef, the spiritual leader of the Shah's party and the former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, also said that the lives of non-Jews are protected in order to prevent financial loss to Jews.
Based.
So,
shout out to Yosef, by the way.
Why do I get the feeling that these guys not only didn't have anything to do with the building of the pyramids, but they probably brought contractors in and didn't pay them at the end of the job? Why?
Yeah, I've long said Mexicans built the pyramids. Illegal.
Venezuelans. Nicaragua, probably.
So Peter, this guy Petre says, just replace Goyim with Untermenschen, and it's impossible to distinguish Zionist ideology from Himmler's comments on the master Aryan race and the justified enslavement of all the subhumans. What kind of idiot says this comparison is illegal hate speech? All Zionists, whether ideological or transactional. And I am afraid to say also significant numbers of anti-Zionists of the secular Jewish and or Trotskyist kind. So let me do, what is it, Keaton? Can you shed any light on this? Is this the way just Zionists think, or is there a certain sect inside Zionists that thinks this way? Is it why people refer to the Jews as the Jews this way? Because I know the Jews I know don't, as far as I know, don't think this way. You and Russ don't think this way, right?
Right. Well, there's a spectrum. Like in my experience, there's like a spectrum of it. So, I grew up, the Jewish half of my family, which is really the only half that I spent much time with, since my mother is Maltese Catholic, but most of her extended family lives in Malta. I've not met most of them. So when I would go to family events, it was always a bunch of New York Jews. I mean, and we were kind of like liberal, secular Jews. We're not like serious practicing Jews, but it is a culture to a large extent. And the way this language is used, there's kind of a range. Like there are certain words that we used to use casually without thinking much about. So like schmuck is an example of that. Schmuck, that's a Yiddish word. When we would refer to someone as a schmuck, it was kind of a term of endearment. We didn't mean they were like a bad person or that we hated them.
Like the
right?
N-word.
Right. It's a schmuck. But apparently there's like a range because so the way we used to use
there's a race
schmuck,
of schmucks. Did you say, really?
No. I said the way I said there's a range, not a race. A range.
Okay,
a range. There's a range of schmucks. So like the way we used to use the word schmuck was like, for example, like my father and I were helping a relative move. This was years back. And, he packed the moving truck full of shit that he did not need at all. So we're out there at the moving truck and we said, can you believe this schmuck packs a broken lamp to move? He didn't just throw it out, right? We're not saying he's like a contemptible, despicable person. He's kind of a likable putz and oaf, whatever, a doofus. But there were times like later in my life where I would be in conversation with people and I would refer to someone else. I would say, oh, yeah, that guy, he could be a real schmuck. And they're like, why do you say that? It'd be very serious. Well, why would you call him a schmuck? Like I just called him a real slur or something. And then I explained what I meant by it. And then I looked it up and it turns out like, yeah, you can use it the way we always use it, kind of casually as New York liberal secular Jews, as like a term of endearment, or you can use it to mean like a truly despicable person. Now, Goyim was always the same way in terms of my understanding of it. It was a little more severe since with Goyim, there is that sort of like racial or religious or tribal aspect, since Goyim refers to non-Jews, whereas a Jew can be a schmuck or a Gentile can be a schmuck. But Goyim, you are not Jewish if you're Goyim by definition. And so, we would refer to the Goyim. Yeah, it is like a term of ridicule, but we never thought of it as like a particularly vicious or mean-spirited term. We would mean it as sort of a joke. Like one of the phrases we would say about non-Jews, we would say, okay, this guy has a goyish cup. Goyish cup meaning a Gentile mind, cup meaning, head or brain. So a guy with a goyish cup, like if we were meeting people for dinner in New York City and they were not Jewish and they paid to park the car across the street from the restaurant, we would say, oh, look at this guy with the goyish cup paying $30 to park.
Even if it was a Schwartz?
Yeah, meaning, he's got an inferior mind. Look at this goyish cup paying to park. He doesn't have the brains to do what we Jews do, which is drive around the city for 45 minutes, seething in anger, having a heart attack, and then parking 15 minutes from the restaurant and having to walk a half an hour in the rain to get to the place. That's what a savvy Jewish mind would think to do. And look at this goyish cup parking right across the street. So, yeah, I mean, that is a little bit more tinged, right? Like there is obviously a little more hostility there since it's like a tribal speak. But I didn't realize how offensive it was to non-Jews to call them goyim.
It's not.
Until I started like interacting with people, basically until this whole, I should say, set of revelations.
This whole Mishigash,
which is that, until this whole Mishigash came to light, where it turns out we kind of are ruled by, a cabal of illiterate Jewish pedophiles. And so I could see how, it doesn't really hit, it does kind of come off as nastier than intended. But yeah, like growing up, like we would use these words, not really mindful of how they are received. Schmuck is the milder version of that. Goyim is the more severe version of that. Like the first time it actually really occurred to me that something must be up with the word goyim. There must be more to the word goyim than I'm picking up on. There's an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David is trying to get accepted into this like waspy country club. And Susie, Jeff's wife, says, they're never going to let you in with that big Jew face of yours. They can see you coming a mile away. And Larry says, why are you saying I have a Jew face? He says, your face is much Jewier than mine. He says, my face is much more Gentile-y than yours. That's what he says. Yeah. And that kind of like, I'm thinking, okay, maybe there is something to the word goy that's offensive because Jews would not say that. A Jew would say, I have much more of a goy face than you. They wouldn't say, I have a more Gentile face than you. If Jews were talking about that, they say, no, I have a goy face. They wouldn't say they have a Gentile face. So that's when it first kind of occurred to me, maybe Gentile is more offensive. Maybe goy is more offensive than a word like schmuck. Like maybe that is received as a slur. And now, given the fact, given that we are living in a time that is so obviously dominated by Jewish supremacy, I understand now how people could be, taking offense to the word goyim, and certainly the way Jeffrey Epstein uses the word goy, the way it's used in these files. Yeah, I mean, I could see people.
If it's any consolation to Gentiles, these people worship Baal and they hate Jews just as much. It's like how Aleister Crowley didn't like Christians, even though he's Christian growing up.
Right.
So that's why they're using it. My Jehovah's Witnesses, I would call both of you worldly. That's our out-group word. Right. If I were a Mormon, I'd call you a Gentile. Right. Or if I was a nicer, non-racist Jew, I might call you a Gentile. If I was a Gypsy, I'd call you a Gaji. Everybody's got their out-group word, so I never took offense to it until I realized maybe the idea that a race and a religion are the same thing might be the problem here.
Right. Well, yes, of course.
Because you're my best friend Big J, a godfather to his daughter, and he's Jewish, and he don't like anybody being anti-Semitic at him, but he's not a reform. You know what I mean? He doesn't do Shabbat candles or something.
Right.
And if he did, they've included, because the Zionists included everybody, a separate sects of people who actually have kind of different beliefs depending on where they're from.
Right.
They made this myth that you all love Israel and it's all the same thing, even though nothing could be further from the truth. And it's the history is as messed up as America's almost of Jew to Jew relations over there.
Right. Yeah. No. So it definitely is something that I became more aware of as I got older, and not just as I got older, but as I got more politically conscious. Like one of my old friends from high school, he was like one of the OG, 9/11 truthers, which meant, he always had a very strong critique of Israel. And when I would like jokingly refer to people as goyim, on Facebook, I mean, this was back before I really did anything, political outside just like talk shit on social media. He would talk about how offensive that was. And I always just thought he was being a little dramatic because he was, in fairness, that was his nature. That was his nature. But I have come to realize how, that I understand totally how that is not received very well now.
So, but can you talk to the culture of them feeling above goyim? Anybody who's a non, so anybody who's not a Jew, they look down on, right? And it's,
100%. No, I mean, look, it is
racism,
it is a
right?
supremacist religion in that way. I mean, they refer to themselves as chosen people, and Zionism is really about racializing Judaism. So yeah, I mean, that is a particularly malignant strain of what we're talking about. But no, it's absolutely an arrogant religion. And as a I can say this. I guess that's why I'm here. It has become a very toxic culture, I think, and I think that the last couple years have really revealed Jewish culture to be a very toxic one. And I say that as someone who kind of grew up in Jewish culture. I have a Jewish sense of humor. A lot of my favorite people, are Jews. But yeah, no, there is absolutely no question about it. A culture of arrogance and supremacy. No doubt about that.
You think it has to do with maybe people being billionaires in something called a mega group? And also the fact that there's a bunch of these rich people. So your reform, you don't care about it, right? The religion itself. But there's a bunch of people that like hate it, and they're like, but they have a racial feeling they're better than people just for that. And they got some real twisted ideas. And I haven't been around Jews. People haven't been around Jews. Jews are like a cryptid to them. They'd have no idea. They have but I just been around Jews my whole life, and it's like another kind of Guido at the end of the day.
Right.
So
that's totally true. Like I worked as a tour guide in New York City for years, and I could always tell how my jokes were going to go down by looking at the crowd when they check in. I'm like, okay, are these people? Am I the first Jew these people have ever seen? If yes, then I'm going to probably just play it straight and not try too many jokes. If not, I'll go for some jokes.
So when you say it's a toxic culture, the Jewish culture, would you what percentage? Like, I wouldn't assume, I wouldn't think that you and say Russ are part of that culture, right? Or are you?
Well, I mean, I think we've definitely, I think we have like innately absorbed a sort of gallows humor that is part of Jewish culture. Like, I'm not saying there's nothing redeemable about Jewish culture.
Correct.
But I think, people like Russ and myself and Max and Aaron and Katie Halper, all the people in this space, all the prominent anti-Zionist Jews in this space, I think, I don't want to speak for any of them, but, I would assume that, we are kind of taking stock of this in a way that we really hadn't before. I know I certainly am. Like, I wouldn't really minimize like the words like goyim the way I do anymore. And Russ and I were talking about this on the show yesterday about how one of the things, I mean, Russ referred to this. He says one of the really tough things about the past couple of years is that it has sort of made Jewish culture kind of toxic. Because a lot of Jewish humor is humor of self-deprecation, and this is why we always said Zionists aren't funny, because Zionist Jews, view vulnerability as weakness. To me, like, you can't be funny unless you're vulnerable. You can't be funny unless you're willing to make fun of yourself, and so you have to have a certain vulnerability about you in order to be funny. And Zionism views vulnerability as weakness and weakness as sin, right? And so they can never make themselves vulnerable, which means they can never be funny. And so I don't think like that part of Jewish culture has gone away. But yeah, I mean, I would say that there has always been a certain arrogance embedded in it that kind of does remain.
I'm gonna play this from Candace Owens' show. I think this was from Tuesday. And I just want to get your reaction to it, because she's reading a book that kind of talks about. So I didn't even know anything about. Kurt talks about how these people worship Baal. I don't even know what that is.
There's a woman pretending who I believe her actually, but she claims to be Epstein's niece, who's been talking about them. Said they worship Baal or Baal. And then these files come out. He's got a bank account labeled Baal.
And what is Baal? What is that?
It means, well, they'll tell you it means Lord, but it means master, I would say more accurately. And in the Bible, that's who the Israelites were always told to like kill, these Baal worshipers. And you'll hear people that say the Bible's bad for this because of genocide. They called those kids Amalek Bibi and them, which is pretty despicable. The Amalekites were disgusting. They should go. They were all pedophiles, actually. and so this religion is sacrificing your kid for material gain. And understand that the Israelites were captive. I don't know, before the Second Temple, they're captive in Babylon. So that's where we get the Babylonian Talmud and Kabbalah and all that. That's the mysticism. So I don't think it's that arrogant, because I was in a religion where we were right. And I'm like, why would you be in the thing if you're not the people that are right? Why would you even bother to be in it? So everybody has that. But the ones that are esoteric and mystical, that's the ones that are steering the ship. And so my friends that I've grown up with, who are just like anybody else I know, who don't really want this label laid on them for stuff that like people that are into dark shit are doing. And that's what when you meet people that are bad, they take advantage of it. You've watched people use their ethnicity as an excuse in every goddamn race there is for all of history. And so like the original, that's why woke died on October 7th, because that's when, Sarah Silverperson had to be like, oh, BLM did say they support Hamas up front. They were kind of honest about that. Like, they just didn't listen. They were arrogant. It's like that Vermont liberal that doesn't remember. Zionists they were atheists. There's a lot of like socialists and shit in there. They're not people that were right wing at all. They used to have a left wing that I guess is strong in Israel, but now it's all these Likud terrorists. So these are gangsters. And much the way Tony Soprano, I would say, is not a good Catholic, I would say these are not good Jews. They're not following Torah. I can tell you that. They're following Babylonian Talmud, which is a little darker and more incestuous and racial.
Sure. No, absolutely. But like I said, like there are like gradations of it, like a story that Russ has told before, and I'm probably not remembering all the details exactly right, but he talks about when, this was decades ago, at a bar, and there's, a bar fight breaks out, and he sort of intervenes to break it up, which was kind of dangerous. Like you could get hurt trying to get in the middle of a bar fight. And so he tells this to, a family member of his, an old Jewish guy. And the guy says, why would you get involved in that? Let the Goyim fight. Why would you get involved in that?
Yeah, like training day. It's like training day.
Right. Well, there's a certain superiority about that. Like, even if that guy, like, I don't necessarily believe that got, like, based on that story, that could be a Zionist or an anti-Zionist Jew. Like, that is an attitude that I could totally imagine an old Jewish person having. Yeah, drinking and fighting, that's for the Goyim. We don't do that. We're more civilized than that. We're more mature than that. We're smarter than that. That is an arrogance that is pervasive throughout the culture, I think, in ways that are kind of different from the way that like many groups have. Like, yeah, like you said, Kurt, like, yeah, every religious group, almost by definition, has some sort of superiority complex, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be a part of the group, right? Like, they think they're going to heaven and everybody else is going to hell. So of course, like, embedded in that is some sort of feeling of superiority in some way. But this is a particular strain of it that does kind of come through in a lot of what we're seeing in these file leaks. I think that's a totally fair interpretation. That is not anti-Semitic.
It's like political Islam.
To notice that.
It's like political Islam. All the political religions are polluted that way, and they always are involved in mass killing. And then they're going to tell you you're a bad version of whatever you are because you have some kind of morals about it.
Come see me on tour. I'll be in Lansing, Milwaukee, Albuquerque, Houston.
Well, the Epstein files release on Friday, and the press suddenly pretends that they're learning about these things for the very first time, like the fact that Robert Maxwell was a Mossad asset, that he was murdered on a boat. This is the Epstein files document dump. Of course, this is in there, and people are saying new information is suddenly released about this new information. But of course, the media is lying, running cover once again. All of this information was written about years ago by David Icke in his books. The satanic rituals, the pedophilia network, the CIA, Mossad connections, the international network. And now we get to witness all of these so-called MAGA influencers, those same guys that had the binders that then suddenly went silent after these documents got dumped. Now they're running cover for Trump, of course, forgetting his deep associations with Epstein, of course. And then Trump comes out and says, I never really was really that friendly with them. Of course, the videos tell a different tale. Of course, the emails tell a different tale. The eyewitness testimony tells a completely different tale. The partying, of course, all of it. And then, of course, one of the mainstream media is running cover in a larger way, saying that all of this pedophilia and Satanism is just something from a bygone era, of course. And David Icke posted this on his X account. The most ridiculous thing I've heard about Epstein is that he ran the world's biggest pedophilia ring, not even close. He ran a Mossad CIA blackmail operation that is just part of a vast global pedophilia satanic network that goes back into the ancient world and on which the very existence of the global cult is founded to this day. And he goes on, of course, about all of that. So this idea, as the New York Times points out, that the Epstein emails reveal a bygone era.
It was just one of those things, a one-off, they say.
Yeah, thank God it's all over now. Now that he's gone.
Great Gatsby, it's gone now.
David Icke, the great David Icke, joins us now to talk all about this, his research, and this vast sort of Satan pedophilia ring and how deep this actually goes. David, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, have you noticed how whenever a scandal breaks, the official response is, oh, yeah, but new checks and balances have been put into place and it can't happen again. It's always the same story. But actually, it is happening again because it's a fundamental part of how human society is controlled.
Well, can you explain that? Because I think if someone is averse to conspiracy theories, they think, well, that was just a one-off. That was awful. I can't believe it happened. It can't still be happening. What is it? How do we know it's still happening? And why would they do this? I guess the big question is, the pedophilia ring is just one part of other Heart of Darkness. Can you paint that picture for us?
Yeah. You see, to understand the resistance to what is going on is to understand that from cradle to grave, people are programmed to believe in a version of normal. Now, this normal may change what they call the Overton window, the limits of public debate and considered real world. It may change, so we have a new normal, but there's always a normal. And that normal never encompasses the extremes of what's actually happening. And, one of the greatest forms of mind control and perceptual limitation is to control the public's perception of the possible. There was a great quote from a guy called Arthur Schopenhauer, a German philosopher, who said words to the effect of, every man, it's not actually every man, but it's getting there, every man basically views the world, the limits of the world, by the limits of his own field of vision. And that's what normality does. It gives people a certain view of what is happening. And therefore, when people come along and expose what is really happening beyond the normal, beyond the walls of normal, then they're immediately mad, bad, crazy, or all of them. And so to grasp what this is all about and how it all fits together, demanding from the start is a blank sheet of paper in terms of preconceived idea, so that we let the information be our guide rather than preconceived idea, which is from the normal. And we have the normal ingrained in us through the education system, which this global cult that I talk about, and this pedophilia and Satanism is all, this cult is founded on that. It created the so-called public education system. It created and owns the sources of communication, the great majority of them anyway. In other words, it controls the sources from which people form their perceptions to grasp a perception of normality. So first of all, that has to go. Ladies and gentlemen, the preconceived normal has to go. Just let the information be a guide. And so to put this into perspective and to explain why Satanism and pedophilia are fundamentally connected, we have to start to realize that this global network, which I call the global cult, which is the generator and the orchestrator of this global pedophilia and satanic network, it is not the origin of human control. It is the player out of that control. It is the servants of that control. The origin of it is not in this dimension of reality, which is merely a band of frequency. That's all it is. If people realize, as I said in our other chat, if people realized just how little they can actually see, they'd be staggered. We can only see something called visible light, which is so tiny, it's ridiculous. The rest of infinity exists in the same space, but we can't access it visually because this biological computer, as I call it, will only literally decode a certain tiny band of frequency. So in the same space that we are experiencing are other dimensions of reality. And there's one very close to this one, but outside of visible light, called the astral frequency. And that's where the origin of human control is coming from. Now, to again grasp why, we have to realize that to this non-human force, this astral dimension force, humans are a source of energetic sustenance. Every time we think, every time we feel emotion, we are generating a frequency. This is well known in mainstream science. We're generating energy. We can't see it because it's outside of visible light, but we can feel it. You know, we talk about good vibes, bad vibes, all horrible vibes. That's because we're feeling the frequencies, but we're not seeing the frequencies. They're outside visible light. And those frequencies are actually an astral phenomenon. Every time we feel emotion and we think in various ways, we are putting this energy, this frequency, into that astral dimension. Now, by their very nature, and demonic is a very good term, by their very nature, this demonic force in this astral dimension is in a low frequency state. It's in a higher frequency state than we are because this human realm is so unbelievably energetically dense. It's unbelievable. But they are in themselves a low vibrational state. And therefore, if they're going to absorb human energy, it has to be within the band of frequency that they're operating on. And it turns out that frequency band relates to what you might call low vibrational human emotion and thought. In other words, the emotions of fear, of anxiety, of depression, of hatred, of regret, of resentment, of conflict, of war, all these things generate or trigger people to generate these low vibrational frequencies. So first of all, there is no benefit whatsoever in this astral force of entities, which are talked about throughout human history, to have a human world that is based on love, on joy, on peace, on harmony, on balance. None, because that's not the frequency they absorb. So when you had the Morpheus character in the Matrix hold that battery up and say the Matrix, which is this is a simulated reality created by this astral force, held up the battery and said the Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to turn humans into one of these. It was a very profound truth in an apparently fictional movie. We are an energy source, but only if we're in a low vibrational state. So you have this this astral force, these entities, these demonic entities, and they have in service to them within the human reality this global cult of secret societies, which are fiercely compartmentalized. So most people in them haven't got a clue what's really going on. It's the inner core I'm talking about. And the role of this global cult is to generate events and happenings in the human realm that are going to trigger in human response to these events, though that low vibrational energy. So if you look at the world, it's a generator of that low vibrational energy all the time in many and various ways, whether it's, this background anxiety that people feel and worry about the future, or whether it's an outright war, which generates phenomenal amounts, obviously, of this energy. This is a loosh farm, as I call it in my book, the Roadmap. It's a loosh farm, and loosh is the word that's given to this low vibrational energy. So if we then look at the connection between pedophilia and Satanism, and why it's so prevalent, and why this global cult has literally a global network, a satanic pedophile network, of which the Epstein network was a part, but only a part. It's to do with energy, and it's to do with this low vibrational energy we call loosh. So, this is what I put together over the years in the books, over now 36 years of full-time research. So, as I mentioned in the chat we had, the longer chat we had, I started to realize when I was putting this global cult together in the early 1990s and how it worked, and how the people in positions of power, like presidents and prime ministers, were just here today, gone tomorrow, assets of this cult. They many of which didn't even know the cult existed. But the cult itself is always there. I started to realize that major players in the public arena that were playing the role of advancing the agenda of this cult to more and more centralization of power and human control, they were involved in satanic ritual. And you go, what? Why? And then you realize that in the ancient world, they were doing openly human sacrifice rituals to the gods. The gods? Who are the gods? Who are the gods through the ages that these rituals are done to, still done to? These non-human entities in the astral dimension that interpenetrate this one. So you had these ancients doing these rituals, and they were sacrificing people. And often you hear the term about sacrificing young virgins to the gods. Well, young virgins is code for children, kids, and there's a reason for that I'll come to. And so what is happening in a ritual, whether it's the ancient openly done ritual or the secretly done now, as humanity reached a point of of maturity where it weren't having their open rituals anymore. Whatever time you're talking about, the question is, what is the gift to the gods that these rituals, these sacrifice rituals are doing? And so you then realize that it comes down to this loosh, this low vibration energy, because the rituals, and I've been given chapter and verse by this by the people who've taken part over the years, some against their will, some who've seen the light eventually, that these rituals are designed specifically to generate maximum terror in the victim. And what terror does, or what terror is a phenomenally powerful low vibrational energy, which these entities feed off. Oh. And as I said in our chat, you can look at someone and you can see from their facial expression and their body language that they're in an emotional state, terror, whatever, but you can't see the energy that they're giving off as a result of that, very powerful energy of terror, because it's going into this astral dimension. And they're feeding off it. These entities are feeding off it. That's the gift to the gods. And then the Satanists within the human dimension who are orchestrating the ritual, they then drink the blood of the victim, and it's by that time laced with a very powerful adrenaline generated by the energy of terror, and it gives them a high. It gives them it's like a drug. It's like an elixir to them. And then you look at pedophilia. That's adrenochrome, by the way, that people talk about. And then you look at pedophilia. Now, I've been given chapter and verse on this over the years. I've talked not only to people in the Western world about this, I've talked to shamans in different parts of the world as well that carry the ancient knowledge. And there's this tremendous synchronicity of explanation between the two. First of all, there's a particular energy that these entities want, and it's the energy of children before puberty. We look at puberty as a hormonal chemical change, but actually what's happening is there's a vibrational change, there's a frequency change in the energy field of the children, and that expresses itself in the so-called physical world as a chemical hormonal change at puberty. They want that energy overwhelmingly before that happens, if possible. And so pedophiles are basically possessed people. Throughout human history, there has been this constant story, this theme of possession. Well, what is that? We have a physical body, what we call it physical. It's not really, but that's another story. We have this physical body because it allows us to interact with this frequency we call human. As I said in the other chat, I can pick up those spectacles because I have a vehicle that is resonating within the same frequency band as the spectacles, therefore I can interact with them. My consciousness, which is a field of energy awareness that overrides the body, that is vibrating so fast, I couldn't possibly interact with this dimension and pick those glasses up. So we have this vehicle. But that electromagnetic field that you might call the mind or consciousness can be, there can be a connection made between these astral entities and that human electromagnetic field. Some people call it the auric field, whatever. And through that electromagnetic connection, then the perceptions of the possessed person can be controlled. And so this whole idea of possession is to connect with the electromagnetic field of human and take control of perceptions and behavior. And when you see these satanic themes where literally someone's face changes into some grotesque entity.
Right. People report seeing the facial shape-shifting.
I've seen it. I've seen it. It's real. Now, the question is, what's going on? It can be very simply explained. Most possession, it connects powerfully with the person when it wants to impose itself on the behavior of that person. Otherwise, it's one step back. And this is why you can talk to people and they say, oh, I met so-and-so who I know is a Satanist. Oh, he's a nice chap. He's very, very pleasant. Yeah, okay. But you want to see him when the entity comes in. So you've got this like schizophrenia in personality between when the entity imposes itself and when it takes a step back, and because it doesn't really have to control behavior in the intermediate time. And so you can have possession where the entity is influencing the perception through the subconscious overwhelmingly of the target person. But it doesn't reach the point where this facial change takes place. However, what the entity is a field of information that relates to how that entity looks and what that entity is. And what happens when the possession gets really, really powerful and intense is that so much of the entity's information is poured into the possessed entity's field that the possessed entity's field starts to reflect the entity. At which point the facial expressions and the facial look of the possessed person starts to change in line with the infused information from the entity. Thus, you have this exorcist type look of people and you think, oh my God, their face is changing. I've seen it. It's real. And so the pedophile is basically a possessed entity, and the charge, the urge to have sex with children is infused by these entities. It might be that.
Do they have agency, David? Do they have agency?
Say again.
Sorry, I was going to say, do they have agency? I mean, because what I'm trying to understand too, at these parties, these events, these Epstein parties and events, and you saw the event that was happening in Mexico where the woman runs out. We've shown the video where she says they're eating humans. They're eating humans, and then she disappears afterwards. Do they have agency? Like, if they're a part of this process, are they giving?
Can they get out of it?
Yeah, are they giving themselves willingly to it? Do they have what sort of mechanism is happening there?
Well, if I may follow up on that, because we see how these low vibrational vessels are finding each other, looking out in email who's game to do this bad stuff. But we do have an archetype. We have Norm Finkelstein, who tells them all to F off. So it seems like they put out their feelers and this vibration comes together if there's already a weakness. What do you think of that?
Like Elon Musk was trying to get to the island. He's like, can I come, please? Can I get there? I want to go there. I want to go to the island. I want to go to the island.
All of the above, basically. But if you think about it, these are low vibrational entities. And if you're in a high vibrational state, if you're full of love and joy and peace and harmony, they can't attach to you because your frequency is incompatible with theirs. Your perceptual frequency, what I call the electromagnetic field, it's incompatible. What they want is to pull you in to low vibrational states. So for instance, the real abuse of alcohol, the abuse of drugs, all these bring you into a low vibrational state, which allow possession. You look at these apparently bizarre secret society rituals. But what these rituals are, and I've talked to some Freemasons and said, what's all this ritual about that you do? Oh, I've got a clue. It's just lost in the mist of antiquity. Well, actually, it's not. But you think it is, because most Freemasons haven't got a clue what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. But these rituals are locking you in. They are tuning you in to these entities, this non-human force. And then what happens? And my God, just look around the world at people who are running this cult. They start to reflect the mentality of these entities. They basically become vehicles for them. So in terms of pedophilia, and I've been given chapter and verse by this over the years in different parts of the world. When the child is being abused, the overseeing entity that's possessing the pedophile is drawing the energy of the child off and absorbing it. Oh. I remember talking to a shaman in South Africa who was, and others have said the same in different parts of the world, that some of these children, these abused children, their energy is basically so absorbed, so drawn off, that only just enough to survive is remaining. There was a Central American shaman who talked about this wonderful energetic field that children have and how these entities draw it off. And so the pedophile is the vehicle. It's the conduit for this energy to be drawn off, which is how pedophilia and Satanism connect. It's all to do with these entities feeding off human energy. And so you've got to go to this level, this astral level, because at that level, everything connects. At this level, within the human world, yes, these cultists can fight among themselves. Yes, they can battle to get up the top of the greasy pole instead of their mate who's also part of it. All this goes on. But if you go to that level, that astral level where it's being orchestrated from, suddenly the left in politics and the right in politics become the same. Right. Islam and other religions and Hinduism and all these different religions, they all become the same religion. Because what do religions do? What does political ideology do if both are without question and without, if they're rigid in their belief and immovable? They create a belief system that limits where people will go. They create their own normal within the societal normal. So you have a Islamic normal, you have a Christian normal, you have a Hindu normal, you have a Jewish normal. These normals are smaller than even the Overton window of society in general. What you're doing is you're limiting their perception. You're holding them in basically boxes of the mind. And so they're all serving the goal and the agenda of these entities. And once you have these rigid belief systems, different ones, political, religious, whatever, cultural, you've got the perfect environment to play them off against each other. So your target population is fighting among itself which divides and rules, so they don't focus on you, it's controlling it all. And also, what are they producing in their fight and their cussing and their conflict with each other? Loosh, low vibrational, emotional and mental energies. So that, to understand what's going on, you have to go here. You have to go here, and most people won't go there because they don't think there is a there.
Right.
And that's what perceptual control has done.
When you see the uniparty, when you see these boxes, as you describe it, even being narrower than the Overton window, and you see this battling back and forth and giving cover for Trump and giving cover for Elon Musk or whatever it is, it's all just operating within this sort of narrow band. And it's so much bigger than all of these people.
Yeah, all of it. And the other thing about the Epstein files, the drop that's just happened, and the previous one, come to that, is that it shows how this global cult works in terms of connecting in the public arena, apparently unconnected. So you have documents, emails, whatever, that connect Epstein to Putin. But he's also connected to the CIA, he's also connected to Mossad, he's also connected to Trump, he's also connected to endless other world leaders and former world leaders. And he's connected into the AI oligarchy, which is massively relevant to current events. And how many people would realize that Epstein was manipulating on that level and interacting at that level? But Epstein was just one guy. This is how it all works. Right. They're all connected in the end. There's a Jewish area of Judaism called Chabad Lubavitch, and that connects into Putin, connects into Zelensky, connects into Trump, connects into Lutnick, connects into Jared Kushner, connects into Netanyahu. There are these networks everywhere, not just Jewish ones. No, not at all, not just Jewish ones, but they seem to be very prominent at the moment, to say the least, and back through history. But this cult is encompassing all these different belief systems, just that some are more dominant than others. But there are these networks which connect people that in the public arena are unconnected. So you look in Britain, you look at Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. Well, his Svengali is Tony Blair. And Tony Blair is owned by Larry Ellison, who funds him. Mm-hmm. Who's massively active in AI and the media in the United States and is the biggest private funder of the IDF in Israel, and who was appointed U.S. ambassador by Starmer, a guy who is was a very close associate of Epstein, and has just now resigned from the British Labour Party of Keir Starmer because of his Epstein connections. And this same guy was the Svengali again of Tony Blair, who was the spin doctor that brought him to power as Prime Minister. So you see these connections everywhere, because there is the public face, everything's unconnected, everything's random, and then there's the real level where everything is connected.
Well, don't you hate when people say, "I told you so"? Yeah, that's me, actually, because I did tell you, sorry, but I told you that gold and silver were going to reap the benefits.
Thrown out of the House of Lords now. But, what you've just described is that's the kind of foundation of the way it works. But, everywhere has its Epstein. So you had the Epstein through that period in the United States and further afield, of course, as we're now seeing. But we had our own Epstein in Britain called Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was a BBC entertainer, and in the 1960s, I remember him coming to prominence. He was known as a disc jockey, which was a new term in those days, and he was a frontman host for BBC programs, and he was on, playing discs on the radio and all that stuff. And playing discs, showing my age. But then in the late 1990s, I published a book called The Biggest Secret, and in which I talked about this non-human element for not for the first time, but in detail. And part of it was that I met one section of it was I met a lady who was a close friend of Princess Diana for 9 years. I've still got our chat on one of those reel-to-reel kind of audio tapes. And she told me a load of things about the British royal family, which had been told to her by Diana, and she had other sources as well. But she told me about this guy, Jimmy Savile, and how he was a pedophile and was in the heart of the British royal family, and how Prince Charles, then Prince Charles, now King Charles, had used Savile, this disc jockey, as a go-between with Diana during their marriage breakup. It's bizarre, you would think.
Right.
And Savile became a very, very close friend of Prince Philip before they had a big fallout, and virtually to his death, if not to his death, was a close friend of Prince Charles, now King Charles. So I started to do kind of research into this guy, and what you find, by his own admission, is that he was invited into the bosom, the inner circle of the British royal family by a guy called Lord Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten was a known paedophile. In fact, there are FBI files on him to that effect. And so this paedophile, Lord Mountbatten, who was a close associate of the Queen, invites this paedophile, Jimmy Savile, into the bosom of the inner circle of the royal family, and he stayed there pretty much towards for much of the rest of his life. And then, after he died in 2011, a year later, there was a television documentary by independent television here. It's not really independent, but it was on that occasion, thank goodness. And it exposed Savile as a mega pedophile. I mean, historic levels of pedophilia. And it was a big furore and what have you. But the royal family were never questioned on it. Hold on a minute. This Jimmy Savile's been in your inner circle since the 60s. You didn't know what he was? Well, of course, he was in there because they did know what he was. Because although his pedophilia and indeed his Satanism came out, as more and more women came forward to describe how Savile had abused them as kids, what didn't come out, but I established and I put it in my books, is that he was a procurer of children for the rich and famous. Oh. Not only was a pedophile himself, he was procuring kids for the rich and famous, including people like the British Prime Minister Edward Heath. Edward Heath was the man who took Britain into the what became the European Union, the common market of the time in the early 70s. And he was prime minister for a time. And in The Biggest Secret, which came out in 1998, when he was still a member of parliament, I named him as a pedophile Satanist. And in the week of publication, a journalist, or passes for one, contacted him and read the passage to him. I mean, he's an MP. He's extremely rich. He could have taken that book out, but he would have to go to court to do it. And all he said was, David Icke must be mad. And that was the end of it. I never heard another thing. 17 years later, when various people came forward making accusations about Heath as a paedophile, Wiltshire police in England did an investigation. He was dead by then. And decreed that if he was still alive, he would definitely be brought in for questioning. There was enough evidence to bring him in for questioning on these allegations 17 years later. And I'll tell you something about Ted Heath, right? I was in television. I finished in 1990 when I had my head explosion, and I was launched into this life for the last 36 years. But during the late 1980s, I was also a national spokesman for the British Green Party. It didn't last long because I saw politics from the inside, and I thought, I'm out of here. But anyway, different rosette, same techniques, same nonsense. Anyway, as a result of, there was a European election, I think it was in 1989, and the Green Party had never done very well. It all very, very small votes and really no mentions in the media at all, really. But during 1998 and into 1989, suddenly the support for the Green Party started to grow and grow and grow. And it was proposed in the polls, or said in the polls, that the Green Party was going to do extremely well in the European elections of 1989. And so I was invited by Sky News to go to their headquarters and comment live on the show as the election results were coming in. Okay. So I turn up and I'm met by this lady at the door, and she says, "Oh, I'll take you into makeup." So she takes me into makeup, and when I went into the makeup room, the door was open there, and I walked in, and to me, the place was empty. And she said to me, "There'll be someone coming to see you in a minute." So I go and sit down, and I'm looking at the mirror thing, and then something caught my eye to my right. Now, let me emphasize, at this point, I had no idea of any of this stuff that we're talking about now. None of it. That started about a year later. So something caught my eye, and I looked across, and sitting behind the door, that's why I couldn't see him, was Ted Heath, then the former Prime Minister of Britain, who'd just been interviewed on the live show and was waiting to have his makeup taken off. So I, being a friendly bloke, I said, "All right, mate." I couldn't stand his politics, but all right, mate. Yeah, how you doing? And what happened next, I couldn't explain, but I could now. He's looking at the mirror when I said hello, and he sort of turned in the chair. Ooh. And he looked at me. Never said a word. Not a word was spoken this entire time. And he looks at me, kind of an inquisitive look on his face, like, what's this? That kind of look. And then his eyes started at the top of my head, and then they went down to my feet, and then went back again. And then he turned and looked back at the mirror, never said a bloody word. Now, what happened while what I would call the scanning was taking place? The entirety of his eyes, including the whites, turned jet black. Jet black. Ugh. And I'm looking at this, And I've described it as like looking into two black holes. It was like, you know, when you're having a conversation with people, you have eye contact. There's eye contact between you.
Right.
But he had no bloody eyes. They were black holes. And so it was like looking, I would say now, like looking through his eyes into another dimension. And what happened later was I was in America. It was 1996. And in a 15-day period, I met 12 different people in different cities, because I was talking to nobody, but I was traveling and talking every day, who told me how they'd seen a human, apparently a human, turn into a reptilian figure and then go back again. And you're like, what? But what you don't do is just dismiss it unless you know it's nonsense. You think, oh, I'll wait and see if other information comes on this. And it did massively. Anyway, I had an appointment after I came back from America to meet a lady who said that she was the former wife of a guy who was the steward of an area in the west of London called Burnham Beeches. It's an area of copse and clearings and woods, and it's owned by the City of London. And anyone who does research into the City of London, you know what an absolutely not only financial center that is, but an unbelievable satanic center that is. I mean,
yes,
horrific. I talked about all that in the books over the years. So I was meeting this lady who was going to tell me about her time with this guy when he was basically organizing Satanism and satanic rituals in those woods. So anyway, we have the chat and I'm writing it all down and all that stuff. And I had a cup of tea. I just finished my tea, and I said, "Well, thanks ever so much for talking to me. That's kind of incredible. I've got to just gonna digest all that." And I put my tea down, and I turned. And as I turned, I said, "You know, I'm having some strange experiences recently." I said, "I keep meeting people who say they've seen people turn into reptiles," and I was turning away, and all I heard was behind me, and I turned back, and she's going. She says, "Oh my God, I wasn't going to tell you that bit." She said, "I thought even you'd think I was mad." And she told me of this of experiences she had in that wood of reptilian type figures. But what she told me, there's this major experience, is that she was out one night walking. It was dark, and she saw a light through the trees. And she crept up and looked through the trees at this light. She said, and this woman knew nothing about my experience with Ted Heath, nothing whatsoever. She said, and I saw a satanic circle, and they were in the robes. And she said, it was led by Ted Heath.
Oh.
Here we go, right?
Oh my God.
And she said next to him was actually his Chancellor of the Exchequer when he was Prime Minister, called Anthony Barber. And then there were these other people in the circle, in the robes. And she said, I was, first of all, I couldn't believe it, but I'm watching. She said, and then there came a point where suddenly Heath transforms into a reptilian figure and grows about 2 feet. Now, this, when they shapeshift, they grow about a foot, 2 foot, is such a common theme all over the world that I've been told by so many people that's what happens in a shapeshift. They basically grow. And she said that then Heath starts talking. She said, like the old transatlantic phone phone calls where there's gaps between the words. People have to be of a certain age to remember the transatlantic phone calls and what they were like. And she said, what shocked me more than anything is that when it happened, nobody in the rest of the circle reacted as if it was the most natural thing in the world and they've experienced it many, many, many times. And it turns out that pedophile procurer of children for the rich and famous, Jimmy Savile, inner circle member of the British royal family, was a great mate and associate of Ted Heath. Who was he also a great friend of? Margaret Thatcher. And the Margaret Thatcher cabinet in the 1990s, there were lots of revelations about the pedophilic nature of some members of her cabinet, well, significant members of her cabinet. And of course, the lid was put on because you've got the cult that is orchestrating the pedophilia and orchestrating the Satanism, but it's also controlling the political and administrative levels. It's also controlling the media. And therefore, it not only has the ability to orchestrate what happens, it has the ability to cover it up and make sure it never comes out. And so what you have is the media will ridicule, or it will dismiss, or it won't even bother reporting or investigating these things. And so many times I've come across people, politicians and such, who have sought to follow up reports of satanic activity and pedophile activity in their area of influence, who've had it shut down and have it shut down by the police. Now, this is another point. It's well known now, and has been for a long time, that the police knew what Savile was doing. They knew that he was a mega pedophile, but he was never collared for it. Never collared for it because of his connections. So you had this guy who was a disc jockey in the 60s, who was allowed to be a mega pedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous right to the end of his life. Long after his media career ended, he had houses all over the place and massive cars and Bentleys with no perceivable, seeable source of income, because he was procuring children for the rich and famous. But the police never touched him. Now, there is the special branch in the police. There is the Royal Protection Unit in the police that directly interact with the British royal family. They would have known what the police knew of what Savile was doing. You think the royal family didn't know? Of course they knew. And so as these connections constantly are able to be made, you have the Epstein connection to Prince Andrew, massive. And you then have Prince Charles, who's now taken the title of Prince Andrew away in a damage limitation exercise. Maybe there'll be more sanctions as a result of this, the latest Epstein drop. And he's like, oh no, Prince Andrew is bringing terrible things on the British royal family. He's been dispatched to a long way from London now, to a house in the middle of bloody nowhere in Norfolk, to try to get him out of the public eye. He doesn't do royal events anymore. He hasn't done for a long time because he was ostracized. But the guy doing the ostracizing was a close mate of Jimmy Savile.
Right, King Charles.
All those years, decades.
Right.
Well, can I ask you, David? You saw
known in the public arena, and the pictures exist. Now, the guy who brought him into the inner circle of the British royal family, Lord Mountbatten, who was a close associate of Jimmy Savile, hence he brought him in. He's known as the mentor of Prince Philip and Prince Charles. So it all kind of connects, and no media organization asked the royal families, the royal family, the obvious question: what is this pedophile doing in your inner bosom since the 1960s? One other thing, finally, on Savile. This lady, this friend of Diana, told me that Savile was into pedophilia on a mega scale. Yeah, it turned out to be true. She told me that he was into Satanism, turned out to be true. And she also told me that he was into necrophilia. He liked sex with dead bodies. Now, Jimmy Savile was famous in Britain for doing charity work. It was one of his fronts. And one of the things he did was volunteer, ongoing over a long period of time, as a porter in a hospital in Leeds in the north of England. Why? Well, we now know it gave him access to the mortuary. So, you know, and because Savile was so kind of famous, and other reasons too in the background, of course, the politicians loved him and wanted to be photographed with him. And, oh, yeah, Jimmy, such a good guy. And that's how he turned out to be. And so, again, you have the public face and you have the real face.
But you talked about, go ahead.
So I felt very strongly around the disappearance of Princess Kate. They're using a doppelganger, her reemergence, having beat cancer, that there was something foul there. And that the idea of using someone who wasn't even close to her appearance, it just really made me extremely uncomfortable. And now in the context of all of this secrecy, it feels like we can feel it when there's some kind of institutional hypocrisy, when there's something transparent about it. And I don't want to ask you to relitigate that because she seems to be back in public appearance, and I don't quite understand it even still, the royal family's explanation, but it does, again, feel like this is an institutional evil that feeds upon itself.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something else. Over the years, things I've picked up in various ways and various sources. Let me go back to the early 1990s when the top of my head blew off and I was launched into this. My television career finished. I left the Green Party and what have you, and I went on this journey of trying to uncover what the hell was going on in the world. And various things happened to me, extremely paranormal experiences happened to me in 1990, 1991 that launched me on this journey. And from the moment they happened, the synchronicity of my life was just ridiculous. I would walk into people, documents, personal experiences, books, whatever, that were basically handing me puzzle pieces in an extraordinary synchronistic way. And one of the things that happened in the early 1990s is that I would keep meeting psychic people, professional psychics. I only went to one in 1990, it's a story I told, and that psychic told me I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets. And I thought you were having a laugh, but it turned out to be true.
Here we are.
Yeah.
But what happened was after that one I went to, the synchronicity of my life was like, if you wanted to meet a professional psychic, well, you should have followed me around for about a year, because I was meeting them all the time. What do you do? Oh, I'm a professional psychic. Oh, well, not another one, you know. But what they were, some of them were telling me synchronistically, was that there was a energetic change coming. What it would do would have the effect of bringing to the surface all that had been hidden. so that humanity could at last see what had been going on without them realizing what was going on. And, for a long time, when I was, subject to endless ridicule and abuse and what have you, and dismissal, it didn't seem like that was going to happen. The first book I wrote, actually, in 1991, was called Truth Vibrations, which was about this. The title was based on this energy of bringing to the surface all that had been hidden. And the fact that it couldn't be stopped. And no matter how this, manipulation was trying to stop it, it couldn't be stopped. And now I'm starting to look at it.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see this, this bringing to the surface all that had been hidden from us. And this is why, as I said right at the start of our chat, that the normal is going to have to change, because what's coming to the surface and being revealed is going to change people's sense of normal. And it's going to be very challenging to them as they see actually the world they've been living in compared with the one they thought they were living in, completely different. So I think we're in for some very interesting times, not only negatively, although they're, this global cult's going to throw the kitchen sink now because it's starting to be backed into a bit of a corner, but also good things in terms of information coming to light and people starting to see, hey, this is real, that they haven't before. So I think, it's not all doom and gloom, absolutely not. And where this goes from here depends on us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, seeing the resurfacing of some of these on X, you've seen it over the past 72 hours. Oh, Princess Diana was right. She was telling us about these things. We had to wait, decades to finally see these things. And then
Michael Jackson,
all these other pieces of these stories. But then you're also seeing people like Dan Bongino try to go back and do his show after lying to all of us. And then the comments just filled with thousands of people saying, you're lying, you're a traitor. So there's an awakening happening.
It must feel incredibly validating to you, who's waited so long and stood in your truth. Yeah. So,
talk about a relief. I thought, you think, well, I'm told this is going to happen, but I can't see evidence of it. But now suddenly you can. Another thing that's happening is that what I call the fake alternative media, present company not included, by the way, the fake alternative media. They're increasingly being exposed as well. What they really stand for is coming to the surface rather than what they said they stood for. And very, very quickly, and one thing in my mind I remember is when I talked to this friend of Diana for over 9 years. Another thing she said, because Diana had died by then.
Yeah.
In the fake accident in the Punt Delma tunnel. Diana, by the way, was an ancient moon goddess, and Pont Delma means bridge or passage of the moon goddess. It's all symbolism, symbolism. And so what this friend told me that Diana told them is about the royal family. She actually said they're not human, and she wasn't talking about metaphorically. She was talking about literally.
Wow. Well, you've seen, and I've studied some of the clairvoyance and remote viewing individuals who've remote viewed into Westminster and other places and talked of really nefarious things. We're talking cloning. We're talking all sorts of bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and of course Epstein was into that whole cloning arena as well. A lot of people don't talk about this Zorro ranch that he had. So many different aspects. Oh, by the way, Juliette Bryant, who was one of the survivors of the Epstein ring. She comes from South Africa, and she was taken into the Epstein ring in America. She talks, as she says on a show on Iconic, our media platform, how when she was with Epstein on the island, that he turned into a dragon-type figure. Very briefly, but very clearly to her, it was a dragon-like figure. And she said at the time, of course, I thought, what the hell's going on? Because I'd never heard of any of it. And then later, a mother, I think, came across my stuff, trying to explain what happened. This world is nothing like we think it is. It's so important, as I said at the start, to have a blank sheet of paper where our perceptions and sense of reality earn their place on that paper by evidence, not preconceived idea, not what we've been programmed to believe all our lives, but on evidence and on basic common sense often, and to encompass the possibility that maybe we don't know it all. You know, there's an ancient Greek philosopher, Socrates, who talked about to know is to know you know nothing. That's basically the meaning of true knowledge. In other words, you realize that whatever you know, given this tiny band of frequency that we're able to see, and just imagine from this tiny band of frequency comes orthodox science and academia, all from this band of frequency that where people glean their perceptions of academia and science. So one thing you can say without fear of credible contradiction is whatever we know, there's always more to know. And so the question is, what don't we know? And that question constantly expands your sense of the possible, and you end up in the realm of realizing that the world is not even a smear like we thought it was.
And trying to navigate all of this. Your new book is called The Roadmap. You can see it over your shoulder there as well. And your new book is called The Roadmap, and you have a brand new UK tour as well. 2 of the dates are already sold out in Hull and Derby. Gateshead is still available at the end of February, and Colchester as well. But I highly recommend, and after our last talk, so many of our viewers said they went and bought your book and bought the roadmap to start to try to navigate all of this craziness.
Well, the roadmap is about connecting the dots across all these different areas. It deals with the here and now Trump phenomena and goes right out into the afterlife, really. But it all connects, and it's like if you don't encompass this other level from which it's being orchestrated, and you only see this level, well, this level will make it appear as if everything's about us and them, divide and rule. But when you go to that level and you realize that these us and thems are actually all controlled from this level, then the us and thems become a they. People say, so who are this they? Well, there you go. That's who they are, ultimately orchestrating human society as a loosh farm. And we don't have to be. That's the point. This is vital to emphasize. The whole point, the whole foundation of human control is to focus attention on this tiny band of frequency, visible light, as if this is all there is. I mean, you've still got orthodox science saying, oh, no, there's no other levels, it's only this one. Yeah, okay. And so all those, endless areas of unexplored space, there's no life there at all. And no evidence. Well, I mean, just look at it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the thing is that once you start to open your mind and let information be your guide, then it's a process starts to happen where you start to expand your awareness into greater and greater and greater swathes of consciousness, beyond the manipulated human world, etc. And that's when you start to tap into insight, knowledge, awareness that you didn't know before, you weren't aware of before. You have these insights, you have these intuitive knowings that suddenly kind of come to you and end up being proved correct with evidence. And the key thing is to understand that level, because what happens is if you're only aware of this human level, if you like, then everything seems to be us and them. Everything seems to be random. Everything seems to be unexplainable. But when you go to that level and you realize that actually that's orchestrating all these apparently unconnected areas of life and organizations and people, then suddenly what appears here to be us and them, divide and rule, becomes here they. People say, who are they? Who's this they? Well, there's the they, and these are just servants to the they. And no matter whether it's left or right or this religion or that religion, they are ultimately in control, even though the vast majority of people with these political ideologies and these religions have no idea that that's the case. And, awakening is so much easier than people realize. I've looked at the kind of the spiritual side and the New Age and all that, and it all seems terribly complicated. You have to go on these quests, or you have to do this or do that to expand your consciousness. I think it's much simpler than that. I really do. I think all genius is simple, and I think we're part of a genius reality in many ways. Well, more than many ways if you get further out. Total genius. And for me, all we need to do is to redefine our self-identity. So if you are focused on your I, who you are, being your body and the labels of a human life, like I'm a man, a woman, I'm this sexuality, this race, this religion, whatever, then you are self-identifying with limitation. You're in a myopia of self-identity, and therefore you are trapped in the process. And what happens as a result of your attention being focused on the myopia of self-identifying with the labels of the body is that your consciousness is also reflecting that myopia. And so you're in the world and you are of it. All your information and insights are coming from the information controlled in the world that you're experiencing. In other words, the cult. But if you redefine your self-identity to I am the consciousness having the experience, that what we call human is merely a brief experience in what we call a human body to interact with this particular band of frequency. But who I am, the real I, is the consciousness having the experience. Then what happens is, instead of your self-identity being myopic, your self-identity starts to expand and expand to the point where eventually you realize that you're an expression of an infinite state of consciousness. You are or basically all that is, has been, and ever can be, having a brief human experience, which is a long way from Ethel on the checkout and Bill driving the bus that we're told to identify with. Right. And as your sense of self-identity expands and expands and expands, so does your consciousness, reflecting that expansion, going deeper and deeper and deeper into the infinite realm of consciousness. And this is awakening. Suddenly you're going, I can see it now. Why couldn't I see it before? Because you were there before. That's why. Now you're here. Now you can see it. And the idea of the whole foundation of the conspiracy is to keep people so focused in their attention. And I'll give you an example. Okay, I'm sitting here, and I can see the room, and basically all that's around me in this visible light frequency band. So now I do that, and I focus on it. The room's disappeared. There is no room anymore. It's just my finger, and that's what myopia does. Myopia of perception, myopia of self-identity. It does that. And awakening is going, oh, sod that for a game of soldiers. I'm more than I thought I was. And suddenly you start to get insights, awareness. You see things you couldn't see before because your expansion of consciousness is expanding with your expanding self-identity. I am consciousness, ultimately an expression of all consciousness. I am not Ethel on the checkout.
David, the new book is called The Roadmap. Again, the tour is available for people that want to go see you live. It's been really an honor. I mean, there was no one that I wanted to talk to more about all of this today to help us make sense of it. And so when you see the sort of myopic approach of people online, it's I hope people
Kofi, follow me.